I came home for Christmas expecting the usual passive-aggressive comments and exhausting family dynamics. Instead, the sprawling Atlanta estate was dead silent and freezing cold. Pinned to the kitchen island was a note from my mother. It read, "Trey and Chloe needed a break, so your father and I treated them to a 2-week trip to Hawaii. Grandpa Silas is slipping badly and cannot be left alone. Since you are single and have the time, you stay and care for him. Merry Christmas." I dropped my bags, the betrayal hitting me like a physical blow. They had abandoned an ailing old man just to enjoy a luxury vacation. But when I walked into the den, my grandfather looked up from his rocking chair. The vacant stare he had worn for months was completely gone. His eyes were sharp, calculating, and terrifyingly clear. He handed me a locked leather briefcase and said, "They think I am gone, Maya. Shall we begin?" Before I tell you how those next 2 weeks destroyed my parents' fake empire and changed my life forever, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the family scapegoat who finally fought back. My name is Maya. I am 35 years old and I work as a forensic accountant. For as long as I can remember, I have been the outsider looking in on my own family. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Atlanta, my parents Desmond and Valerie were obsessed with status. They cared about the right zip code, the right country club memberships, and projecting the perfect image to their wealthy friends. In their eyes, my older brother Trey was their masterpiece. I was just the rough draft they preferred to hide away. The weather in Atlanta was unseasonably bitter that December. I had spent the last 3 days pulling grueling, 12-hour shifts at my accounting firm, wrapping up end-of-year financial audits, just so I could secure Christmas Eve and Christmas Day off. My car trunk was loaded with hundreds of dollars worth of groceries. My mother had texted me a massive shopping list earlier in the week, insisting that since I did not have a husband or children to buy gifts for, the least I could do was sponsor the holiday meals. I pulled through the wrought iron gates of their estate, expecting the circular driveway to be packed with luxury vehicles. Instead, it was completely empty. I parked my modest sedan and hauled 4 heavy grocery bags up the brick front steps, my breath pluming in the freezing air. When I unlocked the heavy mahogany front door and stepped into the grand foyer, a wall of frigid air hit my face. The house was absolutely silent. There was no holiday music playing, no smell of roasting meats, nothing but the low hum of the refrigerator in the distance. I walked into the massive gourmet kitchen and set the heavy bags down on the marble island. That is when I saw it. A thick cream-colored envelope leaning against a decorative fruit bowl, with my name written in my mother's elegant sweeping cursive. I tore it open, my fingers stiff from the cold. I read the words once, then twice, my brain refusing to process the sheer audacity of what my mother had written. Trey and Chloe needed a break. They have been under so much stress lately. Your father and I decided to treat them to a 2-week vacation in Hawaii. We left this morning. Grandpa Silas is slipping badly and simply cannot be left alone. Since you are single and have the time, you stay and care for him. There is leftover casserole in the fridge. Merry Christmas. I stood there in the freezing kitchen, my coat still buttoned to my chin, feeling the familiar burn of tears prick the back of my eyes. I refused to let them fall. This was the ultimate discard, the absolute peak of their systemic disrespect. They had packed their designer bags, boarded a first-class flight to a tropical paradise, and left me behind to act as unpaid medical staff for an elderly man they believed was losing his mind. I began unpacking the groceries mechanically. The artisan cheeses, the organic turkey, the expensive imported wines my father preferred. Each item felt like a physical mockery of my efforts. I placed the milk in the refrigerator and saw the sad plastic container of leftover casserole my mother had mentioned. It was a fitting symbol of my place in this family. I was always the afterthought, the one meant to consume the cold leftovers while the rest of the family feasted on the prime cuts. I thought about my 32-year-old brother, the undisputed golden child. Trey was arrogant, entitled, and perfectly willing to step on my neck to get what he wanted. He worked as a senior executive at the commercial real estate firm my grandfather had built from scratch. Trey barely understood a basic profit and loss statement. Yet my parents paraded him around like a business prodigy. Then there was Chloe, his white wife. Chloe was deeply materialistic and chronically oblivious to her own privilege. She carried designer handbags funded by my parents' bank accounts and constantly made tone-deaf comments about my natural hair or my lack of a husband. "Oh, Maya, you are so brave for focusing on your career instead of starting a family," she had told me at Thanksgiving, adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet. I could never be that selfish. When Trey and Chloe got married, Desmond and Valerie funded a massive luxury wedding without blinking an eye. It was the social event of the season, complete with an ice sculpture and a six-tier cake. When I was accepted into a top-tier accounting program years ago, my father sat me down in his wood-paneled study and told me that my tuition would be an unnecessary financial burden on the family. He suggested I look into a cheaper community college or find a job as a receptionist. I refused to let my dreams die in that study. I took out massive student loans, worked graveyard shifts doing data entry, and built my career as a forensic accountant entirely on my own. I earned my independence through blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. They never praised my success. Instead, my mother frequently told her friends that my demanding career was the reason I could not keep a man, framing my hard-won independence as a tragic character flaw. As I folded the brown paper grocery bags, my thoughts shifted to Grandpa Silas. He was 78 years old and the true patriarch of our family. He had started with absolutely nothing, buying up small rundown properties in Atlanta and turning them into a highly lucrative commercial real estate portfolio. He was a self-made millionaire, a man of incredible grit and intelligence. For the past several months, however, he had been acting strangely. He would stare at walls, forget the middle of conversations, and shuffle around the massive house looking lost. The doctors had thrown around terrifying phrases like severe cognitive decline and suspected dementia. My parents had immediately seized upon his diagnosis. They treated him like an embarrassing burden, a nuisance that interfered with their country club dinners and elite social engagements. Yet they hovered over him like vultures when it came to his assets. The idea that they would leave him alone in a freezing house, trusting completely that I would just show up and handle the mess, made my blood boil. They knew I possessed the one thing they lacked: a conscience. They knew I would never abandon my grandfather, so they used my basic human decency as a weapon against me. I walked over to the digital thermostat in the hallway. It was set to 50 degrees to save money on the heating bill while they were gone. My parents lived in a multi-million-dollar estate, drove luxury vehicles, and wore custom-tailored clothing, but they were remarkably cheap when it came to the physical comfort of the man whose wealth had built their entire lifestyle. I aggressively pushed the temperature up to a comfortable 72 degrees and listened to the massive furnace roar to life in the basement beneath my feet. I needed to find Grandpa Silas. I walked through the formal dining room, passing the grand piano that nobody knew how to play, and the expensive contemporary art pieces my mother bought purely to match the custom window treatments. The house was a monument to their superficiality. It was beautifully curated on the outside but completely devoid of warmth or genuine love on the inside. I approached the heavy oak doors of the den, taking a deep breath to steady my racing heart. I prepared myself to see the man I loved and respected reduced to a confused, frightened state. I braced myself for the heartbreaking reality of spending my Christmas caring for a hollow shell of the grandfather who used to slip me $20 bills and tell me to never let anyone dim my bright light. I placed my hand on the cold brass handle and pushed the door open, entirely unaware that the tragic narrative I had accepted was about to violently shift. The den smelled of old leather, lemon polish, and the stale, suffocating air of a room that had been kept deliberately sealed from the rest of the house. I stepped onto the thick Persian rug, my heart hammering against my ribs. I braced myself for the tragic sight of a broken mind. I expected to find him staring blankly at the wall, lost in a fog that I could not reach. He was sitting in his high-backed armchair, facing the large bay windows, his body wrapped in a heavy wool blanket. He looked small, fragile, and entirely vulnerable. I took a slow, hesitant step forward. I opened my mouth to speak, softening my tone the way you would for a frightened child. I wanted to tell him that I was here, that he was safe, and that I would not leave him the way my parents just did. Then the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me. The metallic sound of the latch engaging echoed sharply in the quiet room. The moment the door sealed us inside, the fragile illusion completely shattered. The slump in my grandfather's shoulders vanished. He threw the heavy wool blanket off his lap with a swift, fluid motion and stood up. He did not stumble. He did not hesitate. He turned to face me, and the milky, vacant stare I had been warned about was absolutely nowhere to be found. His eyes were dark, piercing, and terrifyingly clear. He looked exactly like the ruthless, brilliant patriarch who had clawed his way up from nothing to build a commercial real estate empire in downtown Atlanta. "They actually went," he said. His voice was a booming, steady baritone entirely stripped of the weak tremor he had been using for the past 6 months. "They took the bait." I dropped my purse. It hit the hardwood border of the floor with a loud thud, scattering a few loose receipts, but I could not bring myself to look down. I simply stared at him, my mouth slightly open, my mind struggling to bridge the gap between the medical tragedy my mother had described and the sharp, calculating man standing before me. "Grandpa," I whispered, my voice trembling with shock. "You are okay. You remember me." "I never forgot a single thing, Maya," he replied, walking across the room with a firm, measured stride. "I know exactly who I am, I know exactly who you are, and I know exactly what your father and your brother are doing to my legacy." I stood frozen as he moved behind his massive mahogany desk. My brain, trained to analyze data and find logical patterns, was trying to process the massive deception that had just been unveiled. He had faked it. All of it. The forgotten conversations, the confused rambling at Sunday dinners, the shuffling walk. Silas had orchestrated a masterful, devastating performance, playing the role of a deteriorating old man while maintaining absolute mental clarity. "You faked the dementia," I said, the reality finally taking root in my chest. "You let them think you were losing your mind." "I had to," he said, his expression hardening. "For the past year, I noticed discrepancies in the quarterly reports for the holding company. Small things at first. Accounting errors that Desmond brushed off as minor administrative oversights. But then the numbers started shifting faster. Capital was moving into subsidiaries I did not recognize. When I questioned your brother about a missing deposit from our largest commercial tenant, Trey looked me right in the eye and told me I was getting confused in my old age. He suggested I was forgetting things." Silas leaned his palms flat against the smooth surface of his desk. "They wanted me weak. They needed me incapacitated so they could take control without a fight. If I confronted them directly, they would have just hidden the money deeper and hired fancy lawyers to declare me unfit. So I gave them exactly what they wanted. I gave them a senile, broken old man. And the moment they thought my mind was gone, they stopped covering their tracks. Arrogance always breeds sloppiness, Maya." He walked over to the built-in bookshelves lining the far wall. He reached behind a row of thick, leather-bound encyclopedias and triggered a hidden mechanism. The shelf swung open silently, revealing a heavy steel wall safe. He spun the dial with rapid, precise movements. No hesitation, no fumbling. "Why leave me here?" I asked, the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. "You knew Mom and Dad would dump the responsibility on me. You knew they would take Trey and Chloe to Hawaii and leave me to play nurse." Silas pulled a massive scuffed leather briefcase from the safe and carried it over to the desk. He set it down with a heavy thud. "I did not just know they would leave you here, Maya. I counted on it. I needed them out of this house, completely distracted by their own greed and luxury, thinking they had won. But more importantly, I needed you. I needed my granddaughter." He looked directly into my eyes, and for the first time in my 35 years of life, someone in my family was looking at me with pure, unfiltered respect. "They look at you and see a failure because you do not play their superficial social games," Silas said, his voice dropping to a low, intense register. "They see a single woman who refuses to bend to their demands. But I look at you and I see a top-tier forensic accountant. I see a woman who put herself through a grueling degree, who tracks missing funds for a living, and who has more integrity in her little finger than Desmond and Trey have in their entire bodies." The validation hit me like a shockwave. My parents had spent my entire life minimizing my career, reducing my grueling professional achievements to boring desk work. But Silas saw the truth. He saw my skills as a weapon. "I know real estate." Maya. Silas continued, resting his hand on the locked briefcase. I know how to buy land, negotiate leases, and build skyscrapers. But I do not know how to trace digital ghosts. I do not know how to untangle modern corporate shell games or crack offshore routing numbers. You do. He entered a 4-digit combination into the brass locks of the briefcase. They clicked open sharply. He flipped the heavy leather lid back. Inside the case were dozens of thick manila folders, stacks of bank statements, external hard drives, and legal trust documents. It was a mountain of raw financial data. It was the entire financial anatomy of his life's work, completely unfiltered and unredacted. They thought leaving you here was a punishment, Silas said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his weathered face. They thought they were trapping you in a cage with a ghost. They did not realize they locked the vault from the inside and handed the keys to the only auditor in the state of Georgia who has the skills to completely ruin them. I walked slowly toward the desk, my eyes scanning the dense stacks of financial records. The lingering hurt of being abandoned on Christmas Eve evaporated instantly, replaced by the cold, calculating thrill of my profession. This was no longer a holiday. This was a crime scene, and I was the lead investigator. "What is the mission, Grandpa?" I asked, my voice shedding the last traces of familial warmth, shifting entirely into a sharp professional cadence. "Trace the leaks," he commanded. "Trace every single dime they have siphoned out of my companies. Find the shell corporations. Find the forged signatures. Find out exactly how they are funding that Hawaiian vacation and Chloe's new sports car. I want to know where my money went, how they took it, and exactly what legal mechanisms your father is trying to use to steal the rest of the estate." I reached out and picked up the first stack of banking ledgers. The paper felt heavy and significant in my hands. The numbers stared back at me, waiting to be decoded. "We have exactly 14 days, Silas said, checking his gold wristwatch. 2 weeks while they drink cocktails on the beach and laugh about how clever they are. We have 14 days to untangle their web, secure the remaining assets, and build a financial case, so bulletproof that the district attorney will not even need to blink before issuing the warrants." I looked across the desk at my grandfather. He was not a victim. He was a predator who had been patiently lying in wait, and he had just invited me to join the hunt. The family that had spent decades treating me like an unwanted burden had just handed me the shovel to dig their financial graves. I pulled up a heavy leather chair, sat down at the mahogany desk, and opened my laptop. The boot-up screen glowed in the dim light of the den. I cracked my knuckles, the familiar adrenaline of a forensic audit rushing through my veins. "Let them enjoy the beach," I said, pulling the first flash drive from the briefcase and plugging it into my machine. "Because when they get back, we are going to burn their entire world to the ground." I grabbed the heavy leather briefcase by its brass handles and hauled it out of the dim den. The formal dining room was a monument to my mother Valerie and her obsession with appearances. An antique mahogany table that seated 14 dominated the space, surrounded by velvet-upholstered chairs that were practically forbidden to sit on during normal family visits. We were about to completely desecrate it. I told Grandpa Silas to grab the heavy brass desk lamps from the study while I raided my car for the portable scanner and the extra monitors I always kept in my trunk for emergency field audits. Within an hour, Valerie's pristine, entertaining space was entirely unrecognizable. Stacks of banking ledgers covered the polished wood. Manila folders were organized by fiscal year across the velvet chairs. I dragged a large glass whiteboard up from the basement, propped it against a ridiculous abstract painting my parents bought for status, and began mapping out the corporate structure of Silas's empire. Silas watched me work with a quiet, burning intensity. He brewed a pot of black coffee and set a steaming mug beside my laptop. The silence in the house was no longer heavy with abandonment. It was humming with lethal purpose. We spent the next 48 hours doing nothing but digitizing paper trails. I scanned thousands of pages of trust documents, quarterly tax filings, and bank statements, feeding them into my secure servers. I set up automated algorithms to flag irregularities, but algorithms only catch the lazy criminals. To catch someone who has been operating inside the house for years, you need human intuition. You have to read the numbers like a story. And the story my father Desmond and my brother Trey were writing was a tragedy of absolute greed. I started with the most recent fiscal year and worked backward. Silas sat at the opposite end of the table, manually verifying property tax records against the digitized files I had organized. He was razor sharp. His mind possessed a brutal clarity that made me furious at the indignity of his forced performance over the last year. Every time he pointed out a legitimate transaction, he explained the history of the property. He told me about the tough negotiations, the local zoning battles, the raw sweat equity it took for a black man in Atlanta to build a commercial plaza or an office park from the ground up. It made the theft we were hunting feel deeply personal. This was not just money, this was his life. I pulled up the operational expenses for the downtown commercial sector. Desmond had been acting as the primary property manager for the last 3 years, wielding the power of attorney he had secured when Silas first started showing fake symptoms. The power of attorney was supposed to be a medical contingency. Desmond had treated it like a blank check. I started noticing a pattern of bloated vendor invoices. Cleaning services, landscaping crews, and maintenance companies were billing 30% above market rate. I pulled the routing numbers for these vendors and ran them through a public records database. They were completely hollow, no physical addresses, no state-registered business licenses, beyond a simple filing, and their mailing addresses all pointed back to the same commercial box facility on the outskirts of the city. They were phantom vendors. Desmond was approving fake invoices, routing Silas's money into these ghost companies, and effectively paying his own pockets with his father's hard-earned wealth. It was 3 in the morning on our 4th day. The coffee had gone cold, and the only light in the room came from the glow of my 3 monitors and the brass desk lamp illuminating Silas's face. I was rubbing the bridge of my nose, fighting off a severe stress headache when Silas finally broke the silence. He closed a heavy ledger and pushed it away. He looked at me, taking in my messy bun, the dark circles under my eyes, and the sheer relentless focus I had maintained for days. "I let them treat you like dirt," he said. His voice was heavy, scraping against the quiet of the room. I stopped typing and looked up. He was staring at his hands, calloused and scarred from decades of labor, before he ever wore a tailored suit. "I watched Desmond favor that arrogant brother of yours," Silas continued. "I watched Valerie pick at your confidence, telling you that your independence was a character flaw because you would not conform to their high society country club nonsense. I sat at the head of the table for 30 years, and I let them push you to the margins because it was easier than fighting a war inside my own house." I swallowed hard. The validation was a strange, unfamiliar weight in my chest. "You do not owe me an apology, Grandpa," I said softly. "You were running an empire." "No," he countered sharply. "An empire is absolutely worthless if the people running it have no moral spine. I thought giving Desmond the keys to the kingdom would make him a man. I thought pouring money into Trey would give him ambition. Instead, it just amplified their worst traits. They became soft. They became entitled to things they never bled for." He leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "You were the only one who inherited my grit. When you walked out of this house to pay for your own degree, working nights and taking on heavy debt just to stand on your own 2 feet, I should have stood up and clapped. I should have funded your accounting firm from day one. I let them convince me that your refusal to play their social games was a rebellion. But it was not rebellion. It was survival. You built armor, Maya. And right now, that armor is the exact thing standing between my legacy and total ruin." The tightness in my throat made it hard to speak. I just nodded, turning my attention back to the glowing screens, but my vision was momentarily blurred. The scapegoat narrative I had carried for 35 years finally cracked, completely replaced by a profound, unbreakable alliance. I was no longer the family disappointment. I was the architect of their reckoning. I channeled that emotional surge directly into the data. I dove into the offshore routing numbers tied to the phantom vendors. Desmond was careful, moving money in small enough increments to avoid triggering automatic bank fraud alerts, but he was not careful enough to hide his digital footprints from a forensic auditor who knew exactly where to look. I cross-referenced the routing numbers with a series of wire transfers that had occurred 18 months ago. This was right around the time Trey and his materialistic wife Chloe had gotten married. The numbers on my screen suddenly spiked. I stopped breathing. I leaned closer to the monitor, highlighting a sequence of transactions that dwarfed the petty vendor theft. "Grandpa, come look at this," I said, my voice tight. Silas pushed his chair back and walked around the massive table standing right behind my shoulder. I pointed to a block of data on the main screen. 18 months ago, an emergency capital withdrawal was made from your primary retirement trust. I explained, tracing the line with my finger. The listed justification was a massive structural repair for the Midtown Plaza. It required an immediate injection of $1.2 million. Silas frowned, leaning closer to the screen. There was no structural repair at the Midtown Plaza. I inspected that property myself before my supposed decline. The foundation is solid concrete. The roof was replaced 5 years ago. What did they do with the money? I pulled up the routing destination. The funds did not go to a commercial construction firm. The $1.2 million was wired directly to a holding company called Azure Holdings. I opened a new tab and accessed the Georgia Secretary of State Business Registry. I typed in the company name. The registered agent was a corporate attorney I did not recognize, but the listed business address was a luxury high-rise building in Buckhead. I recognized that address instantly. It was Trey and Chloe's building. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling property tax records for the county. I typed in the address and apartment number for Trey's penthouse condo, the exact condo he claimed he had bought with his massive commission bonuses. The condo my parents constantly bragged about to their friends, citing it as absolute proof of his real estate genius. The search results loaded instantly. The owner of the penthouse condo was not Trey. The owner on the deed was Azure Holdings. The purchase date matched the exact week the $1.2 million was drained from Silas's retirement trust. The purchase price was $1.2 million, paid entirely in cash. The silence in the dining room was deafening. I looked up at Silas. The reflection of the monitor cast a harsh blue light across his face. "I did not buy that condo," I said, my voice eerily calm as the massive scale of the betrayal settled over us. "He stole it." Trey and Chloe's entire affluent lifestyle, the panoramic city, views, the imported Italian marble, the private elevator access. Every single square foot of it was bought with your stolen retirement funds. Desmond authorized the withdrawal using the durable financial power of attorney, funneled it through a shell company, and bought his son a multi-million-dollar penthouse in cash. Silas did not yell. He did not throw anything. The rage radiating from him was utterly silent and absolutely lethal. He placed his hand on my shoulder, his grip tightening until it almost hurt. "The game is over, Maya," he whispered, his voice vibrating with a cold, terrifying authority. "Keep digging. I want every single drop of blood they spilled on my ledgers." I kept digging. The adrenaline masked my exhaustion as my fingers danced across the keyboard, pulling up the primary operating accounts for Grandpa Silas Holding Company. Finding the $1.2 million penthouse was a massive structural blow, but it was a one-time capital extraction. To fund Trey and Chloe daily extravagant lifestyle, Desmond needed a continuous, untraceable pipeline of cash. I switched my focus from the grand ledgers to the micro-level transactions. I requested the digital scans of every physical corporate check cleared over the past 14 months. The bank portal took a few minutes to process the massive query. When the high-resolution images finally loaded onto my third monitor, the sheer audacity of the fraud took my breath away. I opened a side-by-side comparison window on my screen. On the left side, I pulled up a verified, authentic scan of Silas' signature from a 5-year-old corporate tax return. On the right side, I began clicking through the recently cleared checks. "Grandpa," I called out, not taking my eyes off the glowing screen. "Come look at these strokes." He stepped behind my chair again, his presence a heavy grounding force in the quiet room. I zoomed in on a physical check made out for $12,000 to a luxury interior design firm in Buckhead. "Look at the loop on the S," I pointed out, tracing the digital image with my pen. "And look at the spacing on your last name. It is shaky, it lacks your usual downward pressure." Silas leaned in, his jaw clenching so hard a muscle jumped in his cheek. "That is Desmond handwriting. He always struggled with cursive. He is trying to mimic my signature, but he cannot get the pacing right. He is not just mimicking it. I said, pulling up another scanned check, then another, then a dozen more in rapid succession. He is forging it on a massive scale, and he is getting lazier with every single batch. I initiated an automated sorting script to group all the forged checks by payee. The results painted a sickening picture of relentless, unbridled consumption. There were monthly checks for $5,000 written to high-end country clubs. There were massive disbursements to private yacht charters, bespoke tailors, and elite jewelers. Desmond was treating the corporate operating account like a personal slush fund, but the vast majority of the bleeding was flowing directly to Trey and his wife. I clicked on a sequence of checks routed to a luxury auto dealership. The total sum was a staggering $140,000. I pulled the corresponding invoice from the digitized files we had extracted from the briefcase. It was for a custom-ordered Porsche 911. The exact same silver Porsche Chloe had driven to Thanksgiving dinner last month. She complained about the heated seats not warming up fast enough while eating your turkey, I muttered, the memory making my blood boil. She sat at this very table and acted like she had earned that car through her husband's brilliant business acumen. She bought it with your blood, Grandpa. She bought it with a forged check. Silas walked over to the window, staring out into the dark, freezing Atlanta night. They think they are untouchable. They think because they hold the medical power of attorney, no bank teller is going to look twice at a shaky signature on a corporate account. Desmond is signing my name to pay for his son's wife to drive around the city like royalty, all while telling the world I am rotting away in this house with a broken mind. I felt a distinct physical sickness in my stomach. It was one thing to see strangers commit corporate fraud. I investigated embezzlement cases all the time in my line of work. But seeing my own father and brother systematically strip mine my grandfather's life work was a completely different kind of horror. They were not just stealing money, they were stealing his dignity. They were exploiting his supposed medical tragedy to fund their absolute vanity. But the lifestyle expenses, massive as they were, did not explain everything. The math was still slightly off. Desmond was siphoning cash, but he was also deliberately tanking the valuation of certain properties by ignoring maintenance and allowing high-value commercial leases to expire. He was creating a paper trail of financial distress where none actually existed. Why would he devalue the very empire he was stealing from? I need to look at the macro level again, I said, switching back to my main monitor. Stealing cash to buy cars and condos is small-minded greed. Desmond is arrogant, but he is not stupid enough to think he can forge checks forever without an auditor eventually catching the discrepancies. He needs a massive singular payout. He needs an exit strategy before the entire house of cards collapses. I opened the folder containing the legal correspondence. I bypassed the standard corporate filings and started searching for external communications. Specifically, I looked for communications between Desmond and outside legal counsel, using his power of attorney status to bypass Silas entirely. If he wants a massive payout, Silas said, pacing the length of the dining room with slow, measured steps, he has to liquidate an asset. A big one. But he knows I have strict clauses in the holding company bylaws preventing the sale of Tier 1 properties without board consensus. I typed a series of keywords into the search bar. Liquidation, sale, power of attorney, medical incapacitation. The progress bar spun for what felt like an eternity. Then a single highly encrypted email thread popped up. It was routed through a private server, not the company main communication hub. I ran a quick decryption script I frequently use for corporate espionage cases. The text scrambled on the screen, then snapped into legible English. It was a prolonged exchange between Desmond and a partner at a prominent, notoriously aggressive commercial real estate firm based out of Miami. I began reading the thread aloud, my voice dropping an octave as the sheer scale of the treason became clear in the quiet room. Per our previous discussion, the current owner is fully incapacitated. As the acting medical and financial proxy, I am authorized to expedite the liquidation of the portfolio to cover long-term medical care and estate consolidation. Silas stopped pacing. He stood perfectly still, his silhouette casting a long shadow against the wall. Which property, Maya? Which one is he trying to sell? I scrolled down to the attached letter of intent. My heart sank like a stone. It is the Centennial Plaza, I said. The Centennial Plaza was the undisputed crown jewel of my grandfather empire. It was a massive multi-use commercial center in the exact heart of downtown Atlanta. He had fought tooth and nail for that land 30 years ago, battling redlining discriminatory lending practices and corrupt city officials who did not want a black man owning prime real estate in that district. It was not just a property, it was his ultimate legacy. It generated enough passive income to sustain the entire family for generations to come. Desmond is selling it to a Miami development group. I continued reading the contract details as fast as I could process them. The buyers are notorious for predatory acquisitions. They swoop in, buy distressed assets at a fraction of their actual value, and bulldoze them to build luxury high-rises. Desmond is offering it to them at 40% below market value in exchange for a rapid all-cash closing. Silas gripped the back of a velvet dining chair so hard his knuckles turned white. He is burning my legacy to the ground for a quick cash out. He is selling out my life work just so he can have liquid capital to run away with. I scrolled to the final email in the thread. It gets worse, I said, my voice trembling with raw anger. The buyers wired a non-refundable earnest money deposit of $250,000 to secure the exclusivity of the deal. They routed it to an offshore account Desmond controls in the Cayman Islands. Silas looked up, his eyes narrowing to dangerous slits. When did the wire transfer clear? I checked the banking timestamp on the attached receipt. 4 days ago. Exactly 2 days before they packed their bags and left for Hawaii. The realization hit us both at the exact same moment. The tropical vacation, the first-class flights, the luxury resort compound. It was not a much-needed break from the heavy stress of caring for an ailing man. It was a victory lap. Desmond, Valerie, Trey, and Chloe were currently sitting on a pristine beach in Hawaii, drinking expensive cocktails, completely funded by the deposit Desmond took for selling out his own father legacy. They are celebrating, I said, utter disgust, dripping from every word. They think they pulled off the perfect crime. They dumped me here to play nursemaid while they spend your destruction money on surf lessons and spa days. I looked at the closing date listed on the preliminary contract. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. The final signatures are scheduled to be executed on December 28th. Silas walked over to the desk and looked down at the screen, reading the date for himself. That is the exact afternoon they fly back from Hawaii. Desmond was not wasting a single second. He planned to walk off the plane, drive back to this estate, ignore the daughter. He abandoned here and sign away a lifetime of work before his suitcase was even unpacked. The master plan was fully illuminated on the monitors before us. It was a breathtaking display of cruelty, greed, and absolute betrayal. They had traded our family legacy for a quick payout, assuming no one would ever be smart enough or brave enough to stop them. They had severely underestimated us. The glowing numbers on my monitor burned the date December 28th into my retinas. The sheer arrogance of their timeline hung heavy in the dining room air. My father Desmond was not simply planning to steal my grandfather's legacy. He was planning to execute the final lethal blow to our family's empire the very moment he returned from his tropical victory lap. I leaned back in the velvet dining chair and rubbed my tired eyes. Silas stood perfectly still beside me, his breathing slow and measured, processing the absolute betrayal of his own flesh and blood. Before either of us could speak another word, the sharp, cheerful chime of a text message shattered the heavy silence. My phone was resting on the edge of the mahogany table directly next to a stack of forged corporate checks. The screen lit up, casting a harsh white glare across the dark wood. The name Chloe flashed across the lock screen, accompanied by a photograph of her smiling on a yacht. I stared at the device as if it were a venomous snake. Of all the people to reach out in the middle of the night, my brother's incredibly entitled wife was the absolute last person I wanted to hear from. Silas looked down at the phone, his jaw tightening. "Read it," he commanded, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Let us see how the traitors are enjoying their blood money." I picked up the phone, unlocked the screen, and opened the message thread. Chloe had sent a barrage of texts in rapid succession, completely ignoring the time zone difference. I cleared my throat and began reading her words aloud into the quiet room, my tone dripping with bitter irony. "Hey Maya, Hawaii is absolutely exhausting. The ocean view suite your parents booked for us is way too close to the resort pool, so Trey could barely sleep because of the noise. Also, the concierge completely messed up our reservations for the private luau tonight. But that is not even the worst part. I paused, watching a muscle twitch in Silas's jaw. The absolute audacity of complaining about a luxury resort suite paid for with stolen retirement funds was staggering. I swiped down to read the next cluster of messages. Trey went to cover the VIP dinner tab to smooth things over with the resort manager. I continued reading, and his platinum card was declined. Literally declined in front of the entire waitstaff. He is absolutely furious and screaming at the front desk right now, claiming it is a fraud alert. I need you to cash at me $500 right now so we can settle this bill and get out of here without looking like complete fools. Family helps family right. Be a lifesaver and send it ASAP. Make sure Grandpa takes his heart meds, thanks. I lowered the phone and let out a sharp, humorless laugh. The delusion was breathtaking. She was sitting on a beach in Maui, drinking premium cocktails funded by a stolen $250,000 real estate deposit, and she had the nerve to demand $500 from the sister they had abandoned to play unpaid nursemaid. Silas did not laugh. His dark eyes narrowed, locking onto the bank statements spread across the table. Why did his card bounce, Maya? If Desmond wired $250,000 to that offshore account in the Caymans 4 days ago, Trey should have infinite liquidity. Trace the card. The analytical side of my brain immediately overpowered my anger. Silas was right. Thieves operating at this level of financial theft did not let their daily spending accounts run dry during a celebration. It was a massive operational vulnerability. I set the phone down and turned my full attention back to the monitors. I pulled up the primary banking portal and bypassed the macro ledgers, diving straight into Trey's individual executive expenditure accounts. My fingers flew across the keyboard, running a real-time query on the platinum card Chloe had mentioned. The data cascaded down the screen in neat digital rows. I found the rejection code. I highlighted the bright red error message logged by the banking server just 20 minutes ago. It was not a fraud alert, I said, leaning closer to the monitor to verify the routing protocols. The card was not flagged by the bank for suspicious overseas activity. It bounced for insufficient funds. Trey's checking account is completely empty. He has exactly $42.15 left to his name. Silas leaned over my shoulder, staring at the numbers. How is that possible? We just proved Desmond has been siphoning thousands of dollars a week to fund Trey's lifestyle. Where is the pipeline? I opened a new terminal window and ran a reverse trace on the internal transfers between Desmond's master account and Trey's personal accounts. A shocking pattern emerged instantly. Desmond cut him off, I said, the realization sending a cold thrill down my spine. I pointed to a specific timestamp on the ledger. Look right here. 48 hours before they boarded the flight to Hawaii. Desmond manually severed the automated transfer pipeline that fed Trey's accounts. He completely isolated the Cayman Island offshore account. Trey does not have access to the $250,000 earnest money deposit. Desmond is hoarding every single penny of the actual real estate payout for himself. Silas let out a low, rumbling sound that was entirely devoid of amusement. There is no honor among thieves. Desmond is using Trey as a shield. He let his son forge the petty corporate checks for cars and country clubs, making Trey the highly visible target for any potential audit. But when it comes to the multi-million-dollar liquidation of the Centennial Plaza, Desmond is keeping the real capital locked behind a firewall only he controls. I took his son on a luxury vacation to keep him distracted and happy, completely unaware that his daily slush fund has been permanently terminated. The brilliant, ruthless psychology of my father's plan was terrifying. He was selling out his own father and simultaneously setting up his own son to take the fall for the lifestyle fraud, all while preparing to run away with the massive real estate payout. My phone vibrated violently against the wood table. Chloe was calling. I stared at the incoming call screen. My first instinct was to reject the call, block her number, and let them suffer the deep, burning humiliation of washing dishes in a Hawaiian resort kitchen to pay off their dinner tab. I wanted to scream into the receiver that I knew exactly what they had done. Do not ignore it, Silas commanded, reading my hesitation. Play the game, Maya. If you ignore her, they might call Desmond to fix the card issue. If Desmond realizes the internal accounts are being scrutinized, he might accelerate the plaza sale remotely. We need them completely blind, completely comfortable, and completely unsuspecting until they walk back through that front door on December 28th. Give them exactly what they expect from you. Howe was absolutely right. To win a war of this magnitude, I had to suppress every ounce of my pride and wrap myself in the subservient scapegoat persona they had assigned me since childhood. I had to feed their arrogance. I took a deep, steadying breath. I smoothed my features, clearing the cold calculation from my eyes, and tapped the screen to accept the call. "Hello," I answered, forcing my voice to sound breathless, meek, and slightly overwhelmed. Maya, finally. Chloe's voice shrieked through the speaker, competing with the sound of tropical lounge music and clinking glasses in the background. "Did you get my texts? Trey is literally about to throw a chair at the concierge. We need that transfer right now. The bank locked his card for no reason, and it is incredibly embarrassing." I pinched the bridge of my nose, fighting the urge to tell her the bank had not locked anything, that her husband was simply broke. "I am so sorry you guys are dealing with that, Chloe," I said, pitching my voice slightly higher to project submissive anxiety. "Things have been really chaotic here. Grandpa Silas has been a handful all evening. He was wandering around the kitchen looking for his old briefcase, and I had to spend an hour calming him down." Silas stood across the table, watching my performance with a look of profound, silent approval. "Ugh, that sounds awful," Chloe replied, her tone dripping with fake sympathy that barely concealed her utter lack of concern. "I am so glad you are there to handle him. Family sacrifice is right. But listen, the waiter is literally hovering near our table. Can you send the money? I promise Trey will pay you back the second we get stateside and sort out this stupid bank error." I will never see that money again, and we both knew it. But the digital trail of her demanding cash from me, while supposedly on a fully funded luxury vacation, was invaluable. It was definitive proof of their financial hemorrhaging and their absolute belief that they held total authority over my resources. "I am opening my Cash App right now," I said, my fingers simultaneously hitting the keyboard to capture a high-resolution screenshot of her demanding texts. "I am transferring $500 from my personal savings account. It might take a second to clear. You are a literal lifesaver, Maya." She gushed, the tension in her voice evaporating instantly. "We owe you one. Make sure you get some rest. Bye." The line went dead. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not ask if I had eaten a decent Christmas Eve dinner. She got her cash and discarded me without a second thought. I executed the transfer from my personal banking app, sending $500 of my own hard-earned money directly into the digital wallet of a woman who drove a stolen Porsche. I watched the confirmation screen pop up indicating the funds had been successfully delivered. I set the phone face down on the table. The performance was over. My posture straightened, and the cold forensic accountant persona locked back into place. "I consider that a $500 investment in their absolute destruction," I said, looking across the monitors at Silas. "They bought the act completely. They think I am sitting here overwhelmed by your supposed dementia, happily emptying my own savings just to maintain their luxury illusion. They feel completely safe." Silas walked around the table and placed his hand on the back of my chair. His grip was firm, radiating a quiet, dangerous energy. "You played that flawlessly, Maya. You fed the monster exactly what it wanted to eat. They are blind drunk on their own entitlement and entirely unaware that the ground beneath their feet has just disappeared." I turned back to the glowing monitors. The December 28th deadline loomed over us. The forged checks, the offshore Cayman accounts, the secret pending sale of the Centennial Plaza. We had mapped the entire anatomy of the treason. We knew the exact weapon Desmond was using, and we knew the exact hour he planned to strike. "What is our next move, Grandpa?" I asked, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, ready to initiate the next phase of the counter-offensive. Silas stood up straight, adjusting the cuffs of his sweater. The patience of the observer was gone, replaced by the commanding presence of a CEO preparing for war. "We cut off the oxygen," Silas declared, his voice echoing in the grand dining room. "You have the financial data. Now we need the legal authority to use it. Tomorrow morning you are going to pick up the phone and call Dr. Harrison for a private, off-the-books medical evaluation. Then you are going to call my corporate attorneys. We are going to rip the power of attorney out of your father's hands, and we are going to freeze every single asset they think they own before their flight even touches down in Atlanta. Christmas morning broke over Atlanta with a bitter, biting frost that perfectly matched the atmosphere inside the estate. There were no presents, no holiday music, and absolutely no pretense of festive cheer. At exactly 7 in the morning while the rest of the neighborhood was likely opening gifts, Grandpa Silas was already dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, looking every bit the ruthless titan he had always been. He picked up his phone and made 2 phone calls. The first was to his private physician. The second was to the senior partner of the most aggressive corporate law firm in the state. Dr. Harrison Carter arrived less than an hour later. He carried a black medical bag and a look of deep concern. My parents had been feeding Dr. Harrison a steady diet of exaggerated symptoms for the past year, complaining about Silas wandering the halls and forgetting his own name. As I let the doctor through the heavy front doors, he offered me a sympathetic smile, clearly expecting to find a deteriorating patient. I led him into the formal dining room. The sympathy vanished from his face the moment he saw Silas standing tall at the head of the table, flanked by my glowing monitors and stacks of forensic audit reports. Silas did not waste time with pleasantries. He instructed Dr. Harrison to sit down and immediately requested a comprehensive recorded cognitive evaluation. Dr. Harrison, though visibly stunned by Silas's sharp articulation and commanding presence, shifted into professional mode. For the next hour, I sat silently in the corner while the doctor administered a battery of neurological and psychological tests. Silas answered every single question with lethal precision. He recited complex historical dates, performed rapid mental arithmetic, and detailed the exact organizational structure of his commercial real estate portfolio. When the evaluation was complete, Dr. Harrison closed his medical tablet. He looked at Silas with a mixture of profound relief and dawning anger. The doctor realized he had been manipulated by my father. Desmond had exaggerated and fabricated medical incidents to build a false narrative of cognitive decline. Silas handed Dr. Harrison a legal affidavit we had printed that morning. It was a formal certification of complete mental competency. Dr. Harrison signed it without a single second of hesitation, his pen striking the paper with heavy, deliberate force. He applied his official medical seal to the document. With that single signature, the entire medical foundation of Desmond's fraudulent power of attorney was utterly destroyed. Silas was legally certified as fully sound of mind, capable of managing his own affairs and acutely aware of his surroundings. Before Dr. Harrison even backed his car out of the driveway, a sleek black town car pulled through the estate gates. Silas's legal cavalry had arrived. Elias Sterling was a heavyweight corporate attorney who had helped Silas navigate the vicious, discriminatory real estate markets of the 1980s. Elias was an imposing black man in his late 60s, armed with a brilliant legal mind and an absolute intolerance for betrayal. He walked into the dining room accompanied by 2 junior associates carrying thick leather briefcases. Elias took one look at the digital war room I had constructed and understood immediately that this was not a social holiday visit. Silas handed the freshly signed medical affidavit directly to Elias. Then he pointed to me. "My granddaughter has been busy," Silas said, his voice ringing with authority. "She has mapped the entire anatomy of a hostile takeover happening inside my own house. I want you to look at her data, and then I want you to draw blood." I took the floor. For the next 2 hours, I projected my forensic audit onto the large screen we had set up. I walked the legal team through the systematic financial drain. I showed them the forged checks, highlighting the clumsy attempts my father had made to replicate Silas's signature. I displayed the property tax records proving that Trey and Chloe's luxury penthouse was actually owned by a shell company funded by stolen retirement assets. Elias and his associates watched in absolute stunned silence. They were seasoned corporate lawyers who had seen every type of embezzlement, but the sheer arrogant brazenness of a son stealing his father's empire while leaving him to rot was staggering even to them. Then I delivered the final fatal blow. I pulled up the encrypted email thread between Desmond and the predatory Miami development firm. I showed the legal team the non-refundable earnest money deposit of $250,000 routed to the Cayman Islands. I pointed to the preliminary contract for the Centennial Plaza, highlighting the scheduled closing date of December 28th. Elias stood up, bracing his hands on the table, much like Silas had done the night before. His eyes darted across the digital paper trail I had unearthed. "The precision of your audit is flawless," Maya Elias said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Your father has exposed himself to multiple counts of federal wire fraud, grand larceny, and elder abuse. But the immediate threat is that closing date. If Desmond signs those final transfer deeds under the guise of his current power of attorney, unwinding that sale will tie this estate up in litigation for a decade. The Miami developers will claim they were good faith purchasers. We cannot let that meeting happen." "We are not going to prevent the meeting," Silas interjected, stepping up beside me. "We are going to let them walk right into this house on December 28th, expecting a victory lap. I want Desmond to feel the pen in his hand before I break his fingers. We need to secure the assets today, but we do not breathe a word of this to Desmond until the trap snaps shut on his neck." Elias nodded, a predatory smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Understood. We execute a total silent reversal." The legal team immediately transformed the dining room into a drafting facility. The first objective was dismantling Desmond's authority. Elias explained the legal mechanics. Desmond's power of attorney was a springing, durable power, meaning it only remained active as long as Silas was deemed medically incapacitated. Because we now possessed a fresh certified medical evaluation proving Silas was completely lucid, the power of attorney was technically already void. However, to prevent Desmond from executing any rogue transactions while in Hawaii, we needed to file immediate binding revocations with every financial institution connected to the estate. Elias drafted the revocation orders with lightning speed. The language was absolute and unforgiving. It stripped Desmond of all authority to act on behalf of Silas, his trusts, his holding companies, and his personal health directives. Every single ounce of legal power Desmond thought he wielded was being meticulously erased. But Silas did not stop there. "If I am temporarily incapacitating Desmond, I need a new executor," Silas announced, turning to face me. "A new trustee. Someone whose financial acumen is matched only by her integrity." He instructed Elias to draft a new comprehensive power of attorney and an updated designation of the primary trustee for the entire commercial real estate portfolio. He named me. I sat frozen as the junior associates rapidly typed up the new directives. For my entire life, my parents had treated me as a financial liability, an ungrateful daughter who wasted her potential. Now the patriarch of the family was legally handing me the keys to a multi-million-dollar empire. I was being granted absolute legal authority over the very assets my father and brother were currently celebrating stealing. "Are you prepared for this?" Maya Elias asked me directly, sliding the freshly printed documents across the polished mahogany table. "Once these are filed, you hold the trigger. You will have the unilateral authority to freeze accounts, halt property transfers, and authorize criminal investigations on behalf of the estate. Your father and brother will come for you with everything they have when they realize what you have done." I picked up the heavy brass pen resting on the table. I thought about the text message from Chloe demanding cash, while sitting on a beach funded by my grandfather's stolen legacy. I thought about my mother's note casually abandoning this brilliant man in a freezing house. I thought about the 35 years of being told I was the family disappointment. "I am not afraid of them," I said, my voice steady and cold. "They built their entire lives on a foundation of unearned privilege. I built mine by surviving them. I am more than prepared." I signed my name on the designated lines, my signature sharp and definitive. Silas signed beside me, his strokes bold and completely devoid of the hesitation my father had tried to forge. Elias gathered the executed documents and handed them to his associates. "We will file these under seal with the county clerk immediately," Elias instructed them. "Then we initiate the quiet freeze. We will notify the executive branch of every bank holding Silas's assets. We lock Desmond out of the primary commercial ledgers, the retirement trusts, and the operational slush funds." The beauty of the silent reversal was its absolute stealth. Desmond would not receive any automated alerts about the revoked power of attorney because he was currently completely disconnected from the primary accounts, having funneled his stolen cash into the offshore Cayman entity. He was isolated in his own arrogant bubble, sipping tropical drinks thousands of miles away, entirely unaware that the legal ground beneath him had just been vaporized. By the time the legal team packed their briefcases and walked out the front door, the sun had fully risen over the Atlanta estate. The freezing temperature outside remained bitter, but the atmosphere inside the house had shifted dramatically. We had secured the medical proof. We had revoked the fraudulent authority. We had legally transferred the power. The cavalry had done its job flawlessly. Now it was time for me to use that new legal authority to cut the final financial lifelines. The trap was built. All we had to do was arm the explosives. The digital infrastructure of a commercial real estate empire is a complex, breathing organism. For years, my father had been treating it like a personal casino, siphoning the lifeblood of Grandpa Silas and his hard work to fund his own superficial vanity. Now, with the legally binding certified trustee documents uploaded directly to the executive portals of our primary financial institutions, I had the absolute authority to stop its beating heart. I sat down at the mahogany dining table, cracked my knuckles, and opened the master banking dashboard. Silas stood beside me, his hands clasped behind his back, projecting the quiet, dangerous calm of a general watching an artillery strike. I started with the most immediate threat, which was the corporate expense accounts. These were the high-limit platinum cards my father and brother used to fund their daily extravagance. I located Desmond and his primary travel card, the exact one currently swiping for five-star dinners and private cabanas in Maui. I hovered my cursor over the security toggle. With a single satisfying click, I changed the status from active to permanently frozen due to suspected fraud. I did not stop there. I moved systematically through the entire financial architecture of the holding company. I found Trey and his secondary slush fund, the one he used to pay the phantom vendors, and locked it down tightly. I severed the routing numbers connecting the commercial rent deposits to Desmond and his property management accounts, redirecting the massive cash flow into the new ironclad trust Elias had established earlier that morning. Every single pipeline of liquid capital that my father had carefully manipulated was violently and irreversibly severed. I watched the green active icons across my three monitors turn a uniform glaring red. The accounts were dead. The credit limits were zeroed out. The financial guillotine had dropped with absolute precision. It took exactly 14 hours for the shockwave to hit the Pacific Ocean. The time difference meant that while Silas and I were drinking black coffee in the freezing Atlanta morning, Desmond and his entourage were just finishing up a lavish late-night dinner at their luxury resort. I knew the exact moment the trap snapped shut because my phone began vibrating violently against the glass surface of my laptop. The caller ID flashed with my father and his name. I was calling through a roaming cellular network, and the panic vibrating through the device was almost palpable before I even answered. I let it ring 4 times. I needed him to sweat. I needed him to feel the exact same helplessness he had tried to force onto me. When I finally swiped to accept the call, I did not say a word. I just waited for him to speak. "Maya, what in the world is going on with the accounts?" Desmond roared into the receiver. His voice was completely stripped of its usual smooth, arrogant country club veneer. He sounded frantic, breathless, and deeply embarrassed. "I am standing at the front desk of the resort, and they are telling me every single one of my cards has been declined. Not just the personal ones, the corporate cards, the emergency lines of credit, absolutely everything is bouncing." I could hear the humiliating background noise of the luxury lobby, the soft piano music clashing with the hushed, judgmental whispers of the resort staff. Desmond was a man who lived and died by his perceived social status. To be standing in a 5-star hotel lobby in Hawaii, unable to pay a massive bill, was his absolute worst nightmare, unfolding in real time. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" he hissed, trying to lower his voice to avoid a public scene. "The general manager just threatened to lock us out of our Ocean View suite. They are talking about calling the local authorities for theft of services. because the tab for the Luau and the private yacht charter just bounced. Valerie is crying in the lobby and Trey is threatening to punch a valet. I need you to fix this right now. This was the critical moment. If I sounded too competent, too calm, or too informed, Desmond would immediately suspect sabotage. He would call his own lawyers, discover the revoked power of attorney, and blow the entire December 28th ambush we had so carefully constructed. I had to feed his absolute lowest opinion of me. I had to become the incompetent, overwhelmed, financially illiterate scapegoat he had spent 35 years conditioning me to be. Oh my gosh, Dad, what did you mean? Declined. I pitched my voice an octave higher, injecting it with a frantic, stuttering panic. I do not understand. I just paid the utility bills yesterday and everything was fine. Are you sure it is not just a weird international hold? You know how the banks get when you travel out of the state? Desmond let out a sharp, furious breath. It is not an international hold, Maya. I called the automated support line, and it said the accounts are restricted by the primary account holder. Did you touch something? Did you mess up the online portal when you paid the electric bill? I told you a million times you do not have the head for these complex financial systems. I forced a wet, pathetic sniffle into the receiver, channeling every ounce of acting ability I possessed. I did not do anything, Dad, I swear. But Grandpa Silas was wandering around the den yesterday looking for his checkbooks. He was super confused and kept talking about calling the bank because he thought someone stole his wallet. Do you think he called the fraud department and told them to lock everything down? The silence on the other end of the line was absolute perfection. I could practically hear the gears turning in my father and his arrogant head. Of course he would believe that his senile, dementia-ridden father had caused a paranoid security lockdown. It fit his narrative perfectly. It was the exact kind of messy, inconvenient mistake an ailing old man would make, and it completely absolved Desmond of suspecting any deliberate strategic attack from his own daughter. That crazy old fool! Desmond spat his anger immediately, redirecting away from me and landing squarely on the grandfather sitting quietly across the table from me. I told you to watch him, Maya. I told you he could not be left alone for 5 minutes. Now he has triggered a massive corporate security freeze on a holiday weekend. Listen to me very carefully. You need to call the executive branch the second they open tomorrow and explain that Silas is not of sound mind. You need to tell them it was a massive false alarm. I injected another layer of helpless anxiety into my performance. Dad, it is the day after Christmas. The main executive branches are completely closed until Monday morning. I cannot get anyone on the phone except the automated machines. I tried calling earlier to ask about a weird charge, but they said all specialized account services are offline for the holiday weekend. There is literally nobody at the bank who can lift the restriction until after you fly home. Desmond let out a string of vicious, suppressed curses. The reality of his situation was crashing down on his shoulders. He was thousands of miles from home, surrounded by expensive, angry resort managers, and his primary financial lifelines were legally severed until he returned to Atlanta. He had no cash, no credit, and no way to brute force a solution through a closed banking system. What are we supposed to do for the next 3 days? He demanded, his voice cracking with genuine desperation. We cannot even buy dinner. Chloe is having a total meltdown because the spa canceled her appointments. You need to wire us cash from your personal account, Maya. Right now, empty your savings. I will pay you back double when we get home and fix this mess. I looked at Silas. We had anticipated this exact desperate demand. I channeled my most pathetic apologetic tone. Dad, I cannot. Chloe made me cash app her my last $500 yesterday to cover Trey and his bar tab. My savings account is completely empty until I get paid on the first of the month. I have exactly $30 in my checking account right now. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard in my entire life. Desmond was completely trapped. He had systematically drained the family wealth, alienated his daughter, and abandoned his father. Now he had absolutely no one to rescue him from his own disastrous vacation. Fine, he finally snapped the word, dripping with venom and total defeat. We will just stay in the room and eat the minibar snacks until our flight on the 28th. Just make sure you do not let that old man near a telephone again. Do you understand me? When I get home, I am putting him in a facility permanently, And you better have those bank managers ready to grovel when I walk through that front door. Yes, Dad, I said softly, staring directly into the camera of my laptop. I will have everything waiting for you when you get back. He terminated the call without another word. I slowly lowered the phone to the table and let out a long, shuddering breath. The performance was exhausting, but the result was a flawless total victory. Desmond bought the lie completely. He believed the financial freeze was a temporary annoying glitch caused by a senile old man and a holiday banking schedule. He had no idea that the bank managers were not going to grovel because they no longer worked for him. He had no idea that his entire empire was already gone. Silas reached across the mahogany table and picked up his mug of black coffee. He raised it in the air, a gesture of profound, silent respect. To minibar snacks, my grandfather said, his dark eyes glittering with lethal amusement. To minibar snacks, I replied, tapping my coffee mug against his. The countdown to December 28th had officially begun, and we held every single card in the deck. The absolute panic radiating from my father was just a small taste of the devastation that awaited him when he finally stepped off that plane. We were going to let him stew in his Hawaiian prison for 3 long days, trapped in a luxury suite he could not afford to leave, watching his perfect stolen life crumble at the edges. And when he finally made it back to Atlanta, he would be walking straight into an ambush he never saw coming. The satisfaction of our midnight toast carried over into the harsh daylight of December 26th. We had barely slept, fueled by black coffee and the raw electric thrill of taking down a tyrant. I was in the middle of running a secondary decryption protocol on my father's hidden offshore ledgers when my phone vibrated across the polished mahogany table. The screen flashed with an incoming video-audio call. The caller ID displayed Trey. My older brother never called me. He communicated exclusively through condescending group texts or by having his wife Chloe relay his demands. For him to initiate a direct call meant the reality of his empty bank accounts was finally cracking his carefully manicured composure. I took a deep breath, dropped my shoulders, and forced my vocal cords to tighten into a knot of subservient anxiety. I answered the call. "Maya, what is wrong with you?" Trey bellowed into the receiver before I could even say hello. His voice was a volatile mixture of blind arrogance and absolute panic. "I am standing outside a boutique in Wailea, and my black card just declined for a $5,000 watch. Dad is locked in the hotel suite, screaming at some automated banking machine. You messed up the mail forwarding, did you not?" I pinched the bridge of my nose, marveling at his sheer delusional entitlement. He was stranded on an island with zero liquidity, and his first instinct was to blame me for a clerical error. "Trey, I do not know what you are talking about," I stammered, pitching my voice to sound entirely overwhelmed. "I sorted all the mail exactly like Dad asked. I put the bills in the study and threw out the junk. I did not touch anything else." "You clearly threw away a security verification letter, you idiot," Trey snarled. "The bank requires physical mail verification for out-of-state security freezes on the primary corporate accounts. You probably dumped it in the recycling because you have absolutely no idea how high-level wealth management works. You have completely stranded us here. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Chloe is crying in a cab right now because we had to put our breakfast tab on her emergency student credit card." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. The image of my materialistic sister-in-law being forced to use a low-limit college credit card to buy a luxury breakfast was pure poetry. "I am so sorry, Trey," I whimpered, making sure my voice trembled perfectly. "I can go dig through the recycling bins right now. Maybe I can find the letter and read you the verification code." "Do not touch anything else," Trey shouted, his temper completely boiling over. "You have done enough damage. You are a complete liability, Maya. Listen to me very closely. The second our flight lands in Atlanta, you are packing your bags. You are out. I am telling Dad to pull the lease on that little apartment of yours since he co-signed it. You are going to be on the street by New Year's Eve. Consider yourself cut out of this family permanently. Just keep the old man alive until we get back and then get out of my sight." He slammed the phone down, disconnecting the call with a sharp electronic beep. I lowered the phone and placed it gently on the table. The scared, trembling sister vanished instantly, replaced by the cold, calculating forensic accountant. I looked across the array of monitors at my grandfather. Silas had listened to the entire exchange, his hands steepled under his chin, his dark eyes burning with a quiet, lethal fury. "I wants to throw you out on the street," Silas said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "He thinks he holds the keys to your survival. Let him think whatever helps him sleep in his luxury suite tonight," I replied, cracking my knuckles and turning back to my primary keyboard. "Because by the time he lands, he will not even own the shoes on his feet." The threat of eviction meant absolutely nothing to me. I had removed my father as a co-signer on my apartment lease 3 years ago, a detail they were far too self-absorbed to ever notice or remember. But Trey's vicious outburst was the final piece of confirmation we needed. There was no redeeming them. There was no lingering familial loyalty to salvage. We were operating in a state of total unrestricted financial warfare. Silas stood up and walked over to my workstation. He pointed a steady finger at the master banking portal displayed on my center screen. "It is time, Maya. Empty the vaults. Move every liquid asset out of their reach." With the certified, legally binding trustee documents, executed by Elias Sterling. Earlier that morning, I possessed the ultimate unquestionable authority over the entire commercial empire. I did not need a physical signature. I possessed the digital keys to the kingdom. I opened the transfer protocols and began the systematic extraction. I started with the primary operational slush funds. These were the highly liquid cash-heavy accounts Desmond used to float his daily real estate transactions and cover his massive fraudulent lifestyle expenses. With a few keystrokes, I initiated a wire transfer of $4.2 million. I routed the funds directly into the newly formed ironclad trust that Elias had established exclusively under my control. I watched the progress bar load. The transaction cleared. The previous account balance dropped to absolute zero. Next, I targeted the investment portfolios. Silas had built a massive war chest of stocks, municipal bonds, and high-yield mutual funds. Desmond had been slowly liquidating these assets over the past 18 months, transferring the yields into the Cayman Island Shell Company. I executed a total portfolio freeze, locked out the existing brokerage mandates, and transferred the entire 8-figure portfolio into the new trust sanctuary. We worked in perfect synchronized silence. I navigated the complex financial architecture, identifying the hidden capital reserves and routing them to safety. Silas verified the account numbers, ensuring we did not miss a single hidden ledger or emergency reserve fund. For 3 grueling hours, we drained the swamp. We took the multi-million-dollar empire my father believed he controlled and legally evaporated it into thin air. When I finally hit the execution command on the last remaining cash reserve, I leaned back in the velvet dining chair. The glowing red zeros across my dashboard confirmed our absolute victory. Every single liquid asset was secure. The holding company accounts were bone dry. If Desmond attempted to write a check for a pack of gum, it would bounce so hard it would shatter the foundation of his fake reality. "We did it," I said, exhaling a long, shaky breath. "The money is locked in the fortress. They cannot touch a single dime." Silas rested his heavy hand on my shoulder. His grip was warm and fiercely protective. "You protected my life's work, Maya. You protected our legacy. When they try to threaten you again, I want you to remember this exact moment. You hold the power now, not them." I nodded, the profound weight of his trust settling over me. We had secured the capital, but the real estate assets were still vulnerable. Desmond still believed he had the authority to liquidate the Centennial Plaza, and he was highly motivated to close that deal quickly to access the cash he so desperately needed. I turned my attention to the corporate email servers. I had established a background script to monitor Desmond's private encrypted communication channels for any incoming traffic from the Miami development firm. If they were planning a major commercial real estate acquisition, there would be a massive digital paper trail leading up to the final signatures. A silent notification flashed in the corner of my right monitor. It was an incoming message tagged with highest priority, routed directly from the lead counsel of the Miami Development Group. I opened the decryption tool and ran the text through the algorithm. The scrambled code dissolved into a formal legal itinerary. I scanned the contents quickly, my heart rate accelerating with every single line I read. "Grandpa, I said, my voice tight with sudden electric tension. We have the schedule. Silas moved quickly around the table, leaning over my shoulder to read the glowing text. The email was a final confirmation of the closing logistics. The Miami developers were not handling this transaction remotely. The property was far too valuable, and the discounted purchase price was far too lucrative for them to risk a digital closing. They were flying their senior partners and their entire legal team to Atlanta to execute the physical transfer deeds in person. Read the time and location. Silas commanded, his eyes narrowing at the screen. I highlighted the specific paragraph. They are arriving here, I said, gesturing to the very room we were standing in. Desmond arranged to host the closing meeting at the estate. He told the developers that you are too medically fragile to travel to a law office, so he is bringing the paperwork to the house to keep everything discreet. I scrolled down to the timestamp. The meeting is confirmed for December 28th at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Silas checked his watch, then looked toward the grand foyer of the house. Desmond and Trey's return flight from Hawaii lands at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on the 28th. They are planning to drive straight from the airport to the estate, drop their luggage, and walk directly into a multi-million-dollar real estate closing. The sheer breathtaking arrogance of my father's plan was fully exposed. He was not even going to take a day to recover from the jet lag. He was so desperate to secure the massive fraudulent payout that he arranged for the buyers to meet him in his own home a mere 2 hours after his plane touched the tarmac. He intended to sign away my grandfather's crown jewel property right under our noses, assuming I would be too ignorant to understand the paperwork, and Silas would be too incapacitated to stop him. "He is bringing the executioners straight to our front door," Silas said, a cold, dangerous smile touching his lips. "He is saving us the trouble of hunting him down." I looked around the formal dining room, currently buried under stacks of forensic evidence, legal injunctions, and certified medical evaluations. In exactly 48 hours, this room was going to transform from an auditing bunker into an execution chamber. Desmond and Trey were going to walk through those front doors, expecting to find a submissive sister and a broken old man. They were expecting to sign a few documents, secure a massive fortune, and throw me out on the street as a final cruel victory lap. They had absolutely no idea that the deadline they set was not for a real estate closing. It was the exact hour of their total destruction. The countdown was locked, the assets were frozen, and the ambush was perfectly set. All we had to do now was wait for the traitors to come home. I pulled up the flight tracker on my secondary monitor. Desmond, Valerie, Trey, and Chloe were scheduled on a direct Delta flight from Maui to Atlanta. The estimated touchdown was exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon on December 28th. I grabbed a black dry erase marker and turned to the large glass whiteboard I had dragged up from the basement. It was time to build the execution timeline. I drew a bold black line across the glass, dividing the day into strict hour intervals. Desmond operates on a rigid schedule of self-importance, I said, tracing the marker along the timeline. He will demand premium valet luggage service at the airport because he thinks waiting at a baggage carousel is beneath him. That puts them in their luxury SUV by 1:30. Traffic on the downtown connector will be relatively light due to the holiday weekend hangover. They will pull through the wrought iron gates of this estate at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon. I wrote the time on the board and circled it twice with sharp, aggressive strokes. Silas watched me from his velvet dining chair. "Walk me through his sequence, Maya. Tell me exactly how my son is going to behave when he walks through that front door." I leaned against the heavy mahogany table. "It is entirely predictable. They will burst through the doors complaining about the brutal jet lag and the miserable Atlanta cold. Chloe will immediately attempt to hand me her dirty resort laundry, treating me like the hired help. Valerie will complain about the lack of fresh flowers in the foyer, but Desmond will be entirely focused on the impending payday." I tapped the marker against the glass. "He will not walk down the hall to check on you, Grandpa. He will not ask how your heart is doing or if you remembered to eat your meals. He will ignore your existence completely because in his mind, you are already a ghost. He will drop his expensive leather overnight bag by the stairs and immediately commandeer the formal living room. He chose this house for the closing meeting specifically to control the environment. He wants the Miami developers to see the grandeur of the estate. He wants to project absolute generational wealth while he quietly sells it off for parts. Silas nodded slowly, his expression hardening into a mask of pure granite. And the buyers? When do the vultures arrive? 3 o'clock sharp, I said, writing the final timestamp on the board in red ink. The developers are flying in on a private charter. They will have their senior acquisition partners and their lead corporate counsel. Desmond will likely demand that I act as the hostess. He will expect me to serve them aged scotch and mineral water while he sits by the fireplace and signs away the Centennial Plaza. He thinks I am too financially illiterate to understand the massive transfer deeds he is executing, and he thinks you are too broken to intervene. It was a flawless, terrifyingly arrogant blueprint. Desmond had orchestrated the perfect crime in his own mind. He had neutralized the only two people who could stop him by severely underestimating their intelligence. He had weaponized my familial obedience and Silas' supposed medical frailty. Silas stood up and walked toward the glass whiteboard. He reached out and touched the bold red ink marking the 3 o'clock meeting. He is bringing predators into my home, Silas said, his voice a dangerous low rumble. He is inviting wolves to my dining table and offering them my legacy on a silver platter. I capped the dry erase marker. But we hold the silver platter now, I reminded him. The holding accounts are completely drained. The offshore routing numbers are severed. The medical power of attorney is legally dead. When he picks up his expensive fountain pen to sign those transfer deeds, he will be signing a legally worthless piece of paper. Silas turned away from the whiteboard and walked back to the heavy leather briefcase sitting on his desk. The briefcase we had emptied of its financial data still held one final crucial manila envelope. Elias Sterling had left it behind after the legal cavalry executed the account freezes. It was the ultimate failsafe, the absolute legal transfer of the familial crown. Silas pulled the thick stack of premium legal paper from the envelope and laid it flat on the mahogany table. He looked at me, his dark eyes intense and unblinking. Freezing the liquid assets was a tactical necessity, Silas said, smoothing his broad hand over the documents. But a commercial real estate empire is more than just cash in a bank vault. It is land. It is brick and steel and decades of ruthless negotiation. As long as Desmond carries my last name and operates under the assumption of his birthright, he will continue to try and find backdoors into the physical properties. I cannot simply lock the doors. I have to change the locks entirely. I stepped closer to the table, reading the bold legal heading at the top of the page. It was an irrevocable declaration of trust and a total assignment of executorship. Silas picked up his heavy brass pen. I built this empire with my own 2 hands. I fought zoning boards that wanted to keep black businesses out of downtown Atlanta. I risked everything to secure the Centennial Plaza because I wanted this family to have a foundation that nobody could ever tear down. I thought Desmond understood the weight of that sacrifice. I was wrong. He is a parasite feeding off a host he despises. Silas looked down at the signature line. Then he looked up at me. His gaze was piercing, stripping away 35 years of my parents' constant grinding belittlement. You are the only person in this bloodline who understands the value of hard work, Silas said, his voice vibrating with absolute certainty. You did not ask for a handout. You did not demand a luxury lifestyle. You quietly built a brilliant, demanding career while they mocked you for it. You have the mind of a forensic auditor and the spine of a survivor. He turned the legal document around so it faced me. I am formally appointing you as the sole trustee and the absolute executor of my entire estate. I am transferring the legal mantle of this family directly to you. Desmond will have no authority. Trey will have no inheritance. Every single commercial lease, every physical property, and every corporate entity will answer exclusively to you. The gravity of his words hit me with the force of a freight train. My parents had spent my entire existence treating me like an embarrassing mistake. They had told their wealthy friends I was a failure because I chose accounting over a high society marriage. They had designated me the family servant, the one who was only useful for buying groceries and babysitting the elderly. Now the patriarch of the family was handing me the ultimate absolute authority over their entire reality. Are you sure about this, Grandpa? I asked, my voice steady, despite the massive adrenaline spike rushing through my system. Once you sign this, the power dynamic in this family reverses completely. There is no going back. I will not be lenient with them. I will not give them an allowance. I will cut them off entirely. Silas did not hesitate. He did not blink. He pressed the brass pen to the thick paper and signed his name with aggressive, permanent force. The ink bled slightly into the page, cementing the destruction of Desmond Birthright. I do not want leniency, Silas said, pushing the executed document across the table. I want absolute consequence. They tried to bury me alive, Maya. I want you to show them exactly what happens when you hand a shovel to the scapegoat. I picked up the document. The paper felt heavy, charged with immense, undeniable power. I picked up a pen and signed my name on the acceptance line, legally binding myself to the Empire. The transfer was complete. The outcast daughter was now the absolute sovereign. We spent the rest of the evening organizing the tactical deployment of our new legal reality. The forensic audit was neatly bound in black leather presentation folders. The certified medical evaluation proving Silas' absolute cognitive competency was placed in a clear plastic sleeve. The revocation of Desmond power of attorney was printed on heavy stock paper, ready to be deployed the exact second he attempted to authorize the sale of the plaza. I walked through the silent, freezing hallways of the Atlanta estate. The house that had once felt like a prison of expectations now felt like a strategic command center. I looked at the extravagant crystal chandeliers and the imported marble floors. My parents believed this house was a testament to their inherent superiority. They did not realize they were currently standing on a trapdoor, and I was holding the lever. I went to the thermostat and turned the heat back down to 50 degrees. Let them walk into the exact same freezing environment they had callously abandoned me in. I wanted the physical temperature of the house to match the absolute 0-degree reception they were about to receive. I returned to the dining room. Silas was sitting quietly in his chair, looking out the window into the dark winter night. The exhaustion of the past 4 days was visible on his face, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, undeniable pride. "Get some sleep," Maya Silas said without turning around. "Tomorrow is December 28th. You need to be sharp. The wolves are coming to dinner." I closed my laptop and gathered the presentation folders into a neat uniform stack. "I am ready, Grandpa. Let them come." The morning of December 27th arrived with a pale gray light that filtered through the heavy silk drapes of the formal dining room. We had not slept. The adrenaline pulsing through my veins had entirely, completely eradicated my need for rest. I sat at the head of the massive mahogany table, flanked by my glowing monitors, watching the driveway through the bay windows. At precisely 8 o'clock, the heavy iron gates of the estate swung open. Elias Sterling returned, stepping out of his black town car with 3 of his top associates. They carried thick, reinforced leather briefcases that looked heavy enough to crack the pavement. The legal cavalry had not just returned to check our progress. They had returned to fundamentally alter the ownership of the very ground we were standing on. Elias walked into the dining room, shedding his cashmere overcoat, his eyes scanning the digital war room I had maintained through the night. He did not offer a polite greeting. He simply unclasped his primary briefcase and pulled out a stack of dense watermarked legal folios. He laid them flat on the table directly in front of Grandpa Silas. Then he looked at me. "Freezing the liquid assets was a magnificent tactical strike," Maya Elias said, his deep voice resonating in the quiet room. "You successfully starved the beast, but a starved beast will still try to sleep in its own den. Desmond and Valerie believe they own this estate. Trey and Chloe believe they own that luxury penthouse in Buckhead. As long as they feel secure in their physical domains, they will attempt to fight you. We are going to strip that security away from them this morning." Silas placed his hands flat on the table and leaned forward. He looked at the top document. "Desmond never owned this house." Silas stated, his tone devoid of any parental warmth. "I bought this land 40 years ago. I built this estate through my holding company. I let him live here rent-free for his entire adult life because I wanted my grandchildren raised in comfort. He assumed the deed would simply pass to him upon my death." "He assumed incorrectly," Elias confirmed. But to ensure he cannot claim any squatter rights adverse possession or temporary injunctions, when the time comes to remove him, we are transferring the physical deed of this estate out of the holding company and directly into the new irrevocable trust. Elias slid a silver fountain pen across the polished wood. The trust that Maya now legally controls. I stared at the document. The profound weight of what was happening settled squarely on my shoulders. For 35 years, I had walked through the hallways of this sprawling mansion, feeling like an unwanted guest. My mother Valerie had constantly reminded me to wipe my shoes, to avoid touching the imported wallpaper, to stay out of the formal entertaining spaces, unless I was cleaning them. She had treated me like a poorly performing servant in her grand aristocratic castle. Now the legal title to that castle was being handed directly to me. I was not just taking their money, I was taking their sanctuary. Silas picked up the silver pen. He did not hesitate. He signed the transfer deed with aggressive, heavy strokes, legally binding the multi-million-dollar estate into the new trust. Now for the penthouse, Silas said, pushing the executed document toward Elias. My grandson likes to play the self-made real estate mogul. Let us see how he likes being a tenant. Elias signaled to one of his junior associates, who immediately produced a second stack of property deeds. This transfer required a slightly more aggressive legal maneuver. Because Desmond had used the fraudulently obtained power of attorney to siphon $1.2 million from Silas's retirement accounts to purchase the Buckhead penthouse in cash, the property was technically shielded behind the Azure Holdings shell company. However, Elias explained, tapping the paper with his index finger, because Maya's forensic audit undeniably proves that the funds used to capitalize Azure Holdings were stolen directly from your grandfather, we are executing a clawback provision. We are piercing the corporate veil of the shell company. The title of the Buckhead penthouse is being forcibly repatriated into the master trust. I looked at the property address printed on the legal filing. Chloe had hosted a lavish cocktail party in that exact penthouse 3 months ago. She had spent the entire evening bragging to her wealthy, superficial friends about the panoramic city views and the imported Italian marble countertops. She had deliberately spilled red wine on my jacket and laughed it off as a clumsy accident, knowing I could not afford to replace the fabric. She truly believed she was untouchable, perched high above the city in a fortress bought with stolen blood money. "Sign it, Grandpa," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Take the roof off their heads." Silas signed the clawback authorization. The transfer was absolute. In a matter of minutes, the physical realities of my father and brother were entirely dismantled. They were currently sitting on a beach in Hawaii, blissfully unaware that they were officially homeless. When they returned to Atlanta, they would not be walking into their heavily guarded castles. They would be walking into properties solely owned and strictly controlled by the daughter they had thrown away, with the real estate assets permanently secured within my trust. Elias shifted his attention to the second phase of the morning's operation. The property transfers were the shield. Now it was time to forge the sword. Elias snapped his fingers. His associates immediately opened their remaining briefcases and began unpacking thick black 3-ring binders. They arranged the binders in a perfect row across the mahogany table. Each binder was labeled with stark white text detailing specific criminal statutes: wire fraud, grand larceny, forgery, elder financial exploitation. "We are not just relying on civil litigation," Elias said, his gaze locking onto mine. "Civil courts take years. They allow for settlements, appeals, and endless negotiations. Desmond is a manipulative man with a wide social network. If we leave him breathing room, he will attempt to spin a narrative that this is merely a tragic family misunderstanding. We are not giving him the opportunity to speak. We are giving him a loaded gun pointed directly at his own head." I opened the first black binder. Inside, Elias's team had meticulously organized the raw data from my forensic audit into a lethal, perfectly formatted criminal dossier. The first section contained high-resolution printouts of every single forged corporate check I had discovered. Each forgery was placed side by side with a certified copy of Silas's actual signature. Expert handwriting analysis notes were already appended to the margins, highlighting the glaring inconsistencies in Desmond's fraudulent penmanship. The second section tracked the offshore wire transfers. The associates had mapped the exact digital pipeline Desmond used to route the $250,000 earnest money deposit from the Miami developers into the Cayman Island accounts. They had attached the corresponding federal statutes for international money laundering and wire fraud. The third section was dedicated entirely to Trey. It documented the precise flow of stolen capital used to purchase the Porsche Fund, the luxury country club memberships, and float his extravagant daily lifestyle. Trey was deeply legally complicit. Ignorance of the source of the funds was not a viable legal defense when the money was actively being used to evade federal tax reporting. I flipped through these pages feeling a cold, clinical satisfaction. The dossiers were a masterpiece of legal destruction. There were no loopholes. There was no ambiguity. It was a neat, devastating package of irrefutable evidence. These binders are fully prepared for the district attorney, Elias explained, placing a heavy hand on the stack of evidence. We have formatted the exhibits to perfectly match federal prosecution standards. If I hand these binders to the White-Collar Crime Division today, Desmond and Trey will be indicted before the end of the month. Given the dollar amounts involved and the crossing of international borders with the Cayman accounts, your father is looking at a mandatory minimum of 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Trey is looking at 10. Silas looked at the black binders. He did not flinch. He did not show a single ounce of paternal hesitation. They made their choices, he said, his voice echoing with absolute finality. They decided to act like criminals. Now they can face the consequences of their trade. Elias turned to me. The decision of when to deploy this weapon belongs entirely to you, Maya. As the sole executor of the trust and the primary victim of the financial fraud alongside your grandfather, you hold the leverage. These dossiers are your insurance policy. When Desmond realizes he has lost the money and the properties, his first instinct will be violent retaliation. He will threaten you. He will try to destroy your reputation in the city. I closed the heavy black binder and ran my hand over the smooth cover. He will not retaliate, I said, looking up at Elias with absolute conviction. Because the moment he tries to raise his voice, I will hand him this binder. I will offer him a very simple choice. He can walk away from this empire with absolutely nothing and accept his eviction in total silence, or he can fight me and spend the rest of his natural life wearing a federal jumpsuit. Elias allowed a rare, genuine smile to break across his stern face. You have cornered the king, Maya. It is a perfect checkmate. The associates finished compiling the remaining copies of the dossiers. They placed the master binders into a secure lockbox, handing me the only key. The legal trap was fully armed. We had stripped my family of their liquid wealth, we had legally seized their physical homes, and we had constructed a criminal case so devastating it guaranteed their absolute unconditional surrender. I looked at the digital clock on my primary monitor. It was noon on December 27th. In exactly 26 hours, Desmond, Valerie, Trey, and Chloe would pull through the gates of the estate, completely oblivious to the fact that they were walking straight into a slaughterhouse. I stood up from the dining table, the heavy key to the lockbox gripped tightly in my palm. The preparation was over. The stage was flawlessly set. All that remained was the quiet, agonizing wait for the traitors to finally come home. The sun broke over the Atlanta skyline on the morning of December 28th, casting long, sharp shadows across the frost-covered lawn of the estate. I stood by the bay windows in the formal dining room, a steaming mug of black coffee warming my hands. The physical exhaustion of the past 4 days had been entirely burned away, replaced by a cold, crystalline focus. Today was the day. The trap was fully constructed. The assets were locked behind impenetrable digital walls, and the legal tripwires were armed. All that remained was the execution. I turned away from the window and surveyed the dining room. For the past 96 hours, it had served as a chaotic, glowing command center. Portable monitors, tangled power cords, and empty coffee mugs littered my mother's precious antique mahogany table. It was time to clear the stage. Desmond and his entourage were expecting to walk into a quiet, subservient household. They were expecting to find me overwhelmed and exhausted playing the obedient nursemaid to a broken old man. I was not going to give them the satisfaction of seeing my sweat. I wanted them to walk into a room that felt perfectly terrifyingly still. I began dismantling the digital war room. I unplugged the secondary monitors, wrapped the cables with methodical precision, and carried my heavy field equipment down to the trunk of my car. I wiped down the mahogany table until the wood gleamed flawlessly under the crystal chandelier. The massive glass whiteboard covered in the timeline of my father's treason was carefully moved into the adjacent study and locked behind heavy oak doors. I erased every single trace of the frantic, sleepless investigation. The room was returned to its sterile aristocratic perfection. Once the dining room was restored, I returned carrying 3 specific items. I placed them in the exact dead center of the long table, spacing them with deliberate geometric precision. The first item was the black leather presentation folder containing the forensic audit. It held the high-resolution scans of Trey's forged corporate checks, the routing numbers for the Cayman Island offshore accounts, and the digital receipts proving Desmond had stolen the earnest money deposit from the Miami developers. It was the financial autopsy of their greed bound in premium leather. The second item was a clear plastic sleeve. Inside rested the certified medical affidavit signed and sealed by Dr. Julian Carter, legally declaring Grandpa Silas to be of completely sound mind. Beneath it sat the executed legal documents from Elias Sterling, the total revocation of Desmond's power of attorney, and the irrevocable trust designation, naming me as the absolute sole executor of the entire commercial real estate empire. The third and final item was a crisp manila envelope. It contained the formal 30-day eviction notices for both the Buckhead luxury penthouse and the very estate we were currently standing in. The properties were now fully absorbed into my trust. My father and my brother were legally trespassing in homes they believed they owned. I stepped back and looked at the arrangement. The 3 folders sat on the polished wood like loaded weapons. There were no messy wires, no glowing screens, no frantic energy. Just undeniable physical proof of their absolute destruction, waiting patiently for them to arrive. I left the dining room and walked upstairs to the guest suite I had occupied since Christmas Eve. I stepped into the bathroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror. For 35 years, I had allowed my family to dictate how I saw myself. I had absorbed my mother's backhanded compliments about my appearance. I had internalized my father's dismissal of my career. I had worn my independence like a rough, unpolished shield, always feeling slightly out of place in their world of country clubs and designer labels. Over the last 4 days, I had survived on adrenaline, wearing oversized sweatpants and keeping my hair twisted in a chaotic knot. That version of Maya was dead. I turned on the shower, letting the scalding water wash away the exhaustion, the stress, and the lingering residue of a lifetime of scapegoating. I thought about Chloe handing me her dirty laundry. I thought about Trey threatening to throw me out on the street. I thought about Valerie leaving me to freeze while she drank champagne on a stolen vacation. I let the water strip away the last remaining shreds of familial obligation. When I stepped out, I did not just dry off, I prepared for war. I opened my garment bag and pulled out the outfit I had specifically packed for this exact moment. It was a tailored charcoal gray suit, cut with razor-sharp lines that projected absolute authority. I paired it with a crisp white silk blouse and black leather pumps. I styled my hair into a sleek, immaculate press, leaving no room for the unkempt, frazzled image they were expecting to find. I applied my makeup with cool, calculated precision, choosing a dark, bold lip color that commanded attention and refused to be ignored. When I finally looked back into the full-length mirror, the transformation was total. The woman staring back at me was not a subservient daughter. She was not an unwanted burden. She was a top-tier forensic accountant, the sole executor of a multi-million-dollar commercial real estate empire, and the architect of her family's impending ruin. The suit was my armor. The confidence was my weapon. I felt a powerful electric thrill course through my veins. I was finally claiming the space I had earned. I walked back down the grand staircase, my heels clicking sharply against the imported marble floor of the foyer. The sound echoed in the massive quiet house, a steady drumbeat announcing a new regime. I turned the corner and entered the formal dining room. Grandpa Silas was already there. He had also shed the costume of his supposed dementia. The oversized, frumpy cardigans and heavy wool blankets were gone. He was dressed in a pristine navy blue custom-tailored suit with a crisp silver tie. His silver hair was neatly brushed, and his posture was perfectly straight. He looked like the ruthless self-made titan who had built an empire from the ground up, demanding respect through sheer presence alone. He turned as I entered the room, his dark eyes taking in my tailored suit, my elevated posture, and the cold, unyielding confidence radiating from my expression. A slow, deeply satisfied smile touched the corners of his mouth. "You look exactly like the woman who owns this estate," Silas said, his booming baritone voice filling the room with undeniable authority. "You look like the head of the family." I walked over to the table and took my place at the head chair directly across from the front double doors. "I am the head of the family," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of arrogance. It was simply a stated fact. Silas walked over and took the seat immediately to my right. We were no longer playing the roles of an ailing patient and a desperate caretaker. We were an allied front, a unified command structure sitting in perfect silence guarding the gates of the Empire. I checked my watch. It was 1:45 in the afternoon. Desmond, Valerie, Trey, and Chloe had landed at the airport exactly 45 minutes ago. They were currently navigating the baggage claim, likely arguing with the valets, completely unaware that their credit cards were frozen solid and their real estate holdings had been legally vaporized. The Miami developers were scheduled to arrive at 3 o'clock. The timeline was tightening, drawing the key players together into the center of the trap. Desmond is going to walk through that door expecting to find me drooling in a rocking chair. Silas noted, his gaze fixed on the heavy front doors. He expects to hide me in the back room while he pours expensive scotch for the developers and signs away my life's work. "He is not going to pour a single drop of scotch," I said, resting my hands on the mahogany table. "When the developers arrive, they will not be greeted by the desperate man who emailed them. They will be greeted by the legal owner of the Centennial Plaza, and they will be handed a dossier proving they are participating in a federal crime. We will see how eager they are to close a deal when the threat of an indictment is sitting on the table." The silence in the dining room was profound. It was not the heavy, oppressive silence of abandonment that I had felt on Christmas Eve. It was the pressurized, vibrating calm before a massive storm. We sat at the polished wood, the three lethal folders resting perfectly still between us. The house was freezing, the thermostat deliberately kept at 50 degrees, ensuring the physical atmosphere matched the absolute 0-degree reception we had prepared. I did not feel anxious. I did not feel fear. I felt a supreme, terrifying sense of clarity. For decades, my parents had controlled the narrative. They had manipulated the truth, stolen the wealth, and cast me as the villain in their superficial drama. They had demanded obedience and rewarded it with profound cruelty. Today, the pen had been forcibly removed from their hands. I was the author now. We heard the low, unmistakable crunch of tires on the gravel driveway outside. A heavy vehicle was pulling up to the grand entrance. Silas did not flinch. He simply rested his hands on the table and looked toward the foyer. "The wolves are at the door, Maya," he said quietly. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, staring at the heavy mahogany front doors, listening to the muffled sounds of complaints and luggage wheels approaching the threshold. "Let them in," I replied, my voice as cold as the air around us. "It is time to eat." The heavy brass handle of the front door clicked loudly, followed by the violent sound of it being shoved open. The grand foyer instantly filled with the chaotic, overwhelming noise of my family. The sharp clatter of designer luggage wheels grinding against the imported marble floors echoed through the silent house. Then came the immediate, relentless complaining. "Why is it freezing in here, my mother?" Valerie shrieked, her voice bouncing off the high ceilings. "Maya, did you completely break the heating system? My toes are literally numb." I remained perfectly still in my chair at the head of the mahogany dining table. Silas sat to my right, his posture immaculate, his hands resting lightly on the polished wood. We did not move a single muscle as the chaotic parade spilled from the foyer into the hallway leading to the formal dining room. They looked absolutely ridiculous. Desmond, Valerie, Trey, and Chloe were deeply sunburned, their skin peeling and red from the harsh Hawaiian sun. They were dressed in wrinkled resort wear, a stark, pathetic contrast to the freezing 50-degree air of the Atlanta estate. Their faces were drawn tight with exhaustion, jet lag, and the lingering burning humiliation of their frozen bank accounts. Chloe was the first to cross the threshold into the dining room. She was dragging a massive, overstuffed canvas laundry bag behind her. She did not look at my face. She did not register my tailored charcoal gray suit or the absolute stillness of the room. She only saw the person she had spent years treating as her personal servant. "Take this straight to the laundry room," Chloe commanded, stepping toward me and aggressively shoving the heavy canvas bag in my direction. "And wash it on cold. My expensive silk cover-ups are in there, and if you shrink them, you are paying to replace them." She released the bag, fully expecting me to scramble out of my chair and catch it. I did not move a single millimeter. The massive canvas bag plummeted past me and slammed into the hardwood floor with a heavy, satisfying thud. The silence that followed was absolute. Chloe gasped, her sunburned face contorting with genuine shock. "Excuse me," she snapped, placing her hands on her hips. "Did you just drop my designer clothes on the floor? Pick that up right now." Before I could deliver a response, Trey stormed into the dining room. He bypassed his wife entirely, his eyes locking onto me with a look of pure, unadulterated venom. He marched toward the mahogany table, his fists clenched at his sides. "You are dead," Maya, Trey snarled, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You are completely dead. Do you have any idea what you put us through over the last 3 days?" My cards were declined in front of the entire resort management. I had to sit in a hotel room eating stale mixed nuts, while the concierge treated me like a common thief. "What exactly did you say to the bank managers?" I stared at him, my expression a mask of cold, unbreakable stone. I let his threats wash over me, completely unaffected by the temper tantrum of a 32-year-old man who had just lost his allowance. Desmond entered the room last. He was carrying his signature leather briefcase, no doubt containing the fraudulent transfer deeds he intended to sign that very afternoon. He looked furious, his jaw set in a hard, aggressive line. But as he stepped into the dining room, he finally took in the scene before him. His aggressive stride faltered. He stopped dead in his tracks. Desmond was a predator, and predators possess a primal instinct for when their environment has shifted. He looked at the heavy canvas laundry bag discarded on the floor. He looked at my crisp, immaculate corporate suit. Then his eyes shifted to the right and he saw his father. Silas was not wearing a crumpled cardigan. He was not slouched over, staring blankly at the wall. Silas was wearing a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, a crisp silver tie, and an expression of absolute lethal authority. The manufactured dementia was entirely gone. "What is this?" Desmond demanded, his voice dropping an octave, losing its frantic edge and replacing it with a dangerous, calculating caution. "Why is he dressed like that? Maya, what game are you playing here? What did you do to my corporate accounts?" I folded my hands on the table, resting them right next to the 3 perfectly aligned folders. "You asked me to look after the house, Dad." I replied, my voice steady and clear. "I took care of absolutely everything. The accounts are exactly where they need to be." Desmond took a step forward, his eyes darting between me and Silas. "I told you to call the bank and lift the security freeze," he growled. "I am not playing games with you today, Maya. I have a multi-million-dollar meeting in exactly 20 minutes. You are going to get out of that chair, you are going to pick up Chloe's luggage, and you are going to take your grandfather upstairs right now." I did not blink. "I am not going anywhere," I stated simply. "And neither is he." Valerie stepped into the room, shivering violently in her thin tropical blouse. "Desmond, tell her to fix the thermostat. It feels like an icebox in here. We cannot host guests in these conditions." Before Desmond could unleash the excitement building in his chest, the sharp, resonant chime of the front doorbell echoed through the freezing house. The timeline was absolute. It was exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Desmond froze. The blood drained from his sunburned face. He looked at his luxury watch, panic briefly flashing in his eyes. The buyers were here. The men holding the massive life-altering payout had arrived, and his perfectly controlled environment was in total disarray. The house was 50 degrees, his scapegoat daughter was refusing orders, and his supposedly senile father was sitting at the dining table looking sharper than a razor blade. "Get the door!" Desmond hissed at Valerie, his charismatic business persona warring with his rising panic. Do not let them see you shivering. Just smile and bring them straight to the study. Valerie practically sprinted toward the foyer, desperate to escape the tense atmosphere of the dining room. Desmond turned his full, terrifying attention back to me and Silas. He leaned over the mahogany table, planting his hands firmly on the polished wood. Listen to me very carefully, Desmond whispered, his voice dripping with venom. I have the biggest deal of my entire life, walking through those doors right now. I do not know what kind of delusional rebellion you think you are staging today, Maya, but it ends right this second. You are going to take this old man by the arm, and you are going to walk him out the back servants' staircase. If you ruin this meeting for me, I swear I will destroy you. I looked up at him, studying the desperate greed sweating from his pores. I am not ruining your meeting, Dad, I replied calmly. I am just staying for the presentation. Footsteps approached from the hallway. Desmond abruptly abandoned his aggressive posture, immediately straightening his spine and forcing a brilliant magnetic smile onto his face. The transformation was sickening to watch. The abusive, manipulative father vanished instantly, replaced by the charming, successful real estate tycoon. Valerie led the delegation into the formal dining room. There were 4 men in total. 2 of them were senior acquisition partners from the predatory Miami development firm, dressed in sleek, expensive linen suits that looked entirely out of place in the freezing winter air of Atlanta. The other 2 men were their corporate legal counsel, carrying thick briefcases identical to the one Desmond held. Desmond, one of the senior partners, greeted, extending a perfectly manicured hand. A pleasure to finally execute this in person. Your property is quite the statement. Desmond shook his hand vigorously, projecting absolute confidence. Welcome, gentlemen. The pleasure is entirely mine. Please excuse the slight chill in the air today. We are experiencing a minor smart home glitch with the HVAC system. You know how these automated systems can be entirely unpredictable. The developers chuckled politely, clearly eager to get down to business. We understand perfectly, the lead counsel said, setting his briefcase on the edge of the mahogany table. We have all the transfer deeds prepared. We just need to review the final addendums and execute the signatures. Should we move to your study? Desmond gestured expansively toward the hallway. Yes, my study is just down the hall. We can handle the paperwork in private. Actually, the second senior partner interrupted, glancing at the massive 14-seat mahogany dining table. We have quite a few blueprints and architectural surveys to spread out. This table is magnificent. We can just execute the documents right here if you do not mind. Desmond's forced smile tightened fractionally. He looked at me, sitting at the head of the table in my charcoal suit, and then at Silas, sitting perfectly still to my right. The developers had not yet realized that we were not just background decorations. Of course, Desmond lied smoothly, stepping closer to my chair, in a blatant attempt to physically intimidate me into moving. Maya, sweetheart, be a dear and clear out so the men can work. Why don't you take your grandfather up to the sunroom? He must be getting very tired. He has been having a rather good day today, gentlemen, Desmond added, offering the developers a look of performative, tragic sympathy. But I cannot risk him experiencing an episode of confusion during our legal proceedings. You understand. The developers nodded with solemn, practiced empathy, completely buying the narrative of the devoted son caring for his broken father. I leaned back in my chair and crossed my arms over my chest. I looked directly at the lead counsel for the Miami development firm. My grandfather is not confused. I stated, my voice echoing clearly in the vast room, freezing Desmond exactly where he stood. And we are not leaving this table. Please, gentlemen, take a seat. We have a tremendous amount of financial data to review before anyone signs a single piece of paper. The developers froze. The lead counsel for the Miami firm lowered his briefcase, his eyes darting from my perfectly tailored suit to Desmond's sudden pale paralysis. Desmond let out a sharp, forced laugh that sounded like cracking glass. Gentlemen, I apologize for this bizarre interruption. My daughter has a history of dramatic outbursts. She is highly emotional and clearly not understanding the gravity of our business today. Maya, get up right now. He stepped toward me, reaching out to physically pull my chair back from the table. He never made it. Do not touch her. The voice did not come from me. It came from Grandpa Silas. He stood up. The movement was not the slow, shuffling effort of a frail old man. It was the sharp, dominant rise of a corporate titan claiming his absolute territory. He planted his fists on the mahogany table and locked eyes with the senior acquisition partner. The sheer force of his presence completely sucked the air out of the room. Desmond stumbled back, his hands suspended in midair. "Dad, you need to sit down. You are confused. Your heart cannot take this kind of stress." "I am not confused," Desmond Silas said, his voice a booming, resonant baritone that shook the crystal chandelier above us. "I know exactly what day it is. I know exactly who is standing in my dining room, and I know exactly what you are trying to steal." Silas turned his full, terrifying attention to the two senior partners from Miami. "Gentlemen, you flew a very long way to purchase the Centennial Plaza. I am Silas, the sole founder and owner of that property. And I am telling you right now, my son has absolutely no legal authority to sell you a single square foot of my land." The lead counsel for the developers immediately tensed. He looked at Desmond, his professional courtesy vanishing. "Desmond, what is the meaning of this? You assured us you held a durable medical power of attorney. You provided documentation stating your father was completely incapacitated and unable to manage his own affairs." "He is incapacitated!" Desmond shouted, the panic finally breaking through his charismatic facade. "Look at him. He is having a manic episode. He does not know what he is saying. He belongs in a facility. We have the legal paperwork. The power of attorney is valid." I reached into the center of the table and picked up the clear plastic sleeve. I slid it smoothly across the polished wood, stopping it directly in front of the lead counsel. "The power of attorney was revoked yesterday morning," I stated, my voice cutting through Desmond's shouting like a scalpel. "And the medical justification your firm relied upon is completely fraudulent." The counsel picked up the document. His eyes scanned the heavy stock paper. "What is this?" "That is a certified, notarized medical affidavit," I explained, leaning forward. "It was executed 24 hours ago by my grandfather's primary physician, Dr. Julian Carter. It legally certifies that Silas is of completely sound mind, possessing full cognitive capacity to manage his personal and corporate estate. The springing power of attorney. My father used to initiate this sale is legally dead. It has been formally revoked and filed under seal with the county clerk. If you sign any transfer deeds with Desmond today, you are signing a worthless, fraudulent document." Desmond let out a breathless, animalistic sound of pure shock. He lunged toward the table, trying to snatch the affidavit from the lawyer's hands, but the counsel swiftly pulled it out of his reach. "You forged that," Desmond snarled, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You printed that off the internet. You are trying to sabotage this family." Valerie let out a loud sob from the hallway. Trey and Chloe pushed their way into the dining room, their sunburned faces masking absolute terror as they realized the magnitude of what was happening. "She is lying," Trey yelled, joining his father's frantic defense. "She is just a bitter accountant who hates us. Do not listen to her." I did not even look at my brother. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the Miami legal team. I picked up the thick black leather presentation folder containing the forensic audit and pushed it to the center of the table. "My name is Maya," I said, maintaining absolute unwavering eye contact with the lead counsel. "I am a licensed forensic accountant. I am also the newly appointed sole executor and trustee of this entire commercial real estate empire. Inside that binder, you will find the complete anatomy of a massive financial crime." The second senior partner leaned over and opened the black folder. The crisp, high-resolution scans of the forged corporate checks stared back at him. "My father and my brother have spent the last 14 months systematically embezzling millions of dollars from the holding company operating accounts." I continued my delivery, rapid and devoid of any emotion. "They have forged my grandfather's signature to fund luxury auto purchases, private country club memberships, and multi-million-dollar cash real estate acquisitions. Every single piece of evidence is documented, cross-referenced, and formatted for the district attorney." Desmond grabbed his own hair, pacing frantically behind the chairs. "This is a setup. This is a vicious lie. Gentlemen, please let us step into my study. We can clear this up. We can still close this deal today." The lead counsel ignored him entirely. He flipped to the second tab in my binder. He stopped breathing. He tapped his colleague on the arm, pointing to a specific page. I knew exactly what page they were looking at. You will find the wire transfer records in Section 2, I instructed them. Specifically the $250,000 earnest money deposit your firm wired to secure the exclusivity of the Centennial Plaza sale. The senior partner looked up at me, his face completely drained of color. We wired those funds to a secure corporate escrow account designated by Desmond. You wired those funds to an offshore shell company in the Cayman Islands, I corrected him. Desmond provided you with a fraudulent routing number. He diverted your corporate capital across international borders to fund his personal vacation. He just returned from Hawaii 2 hours ago, entirely financed by your deposit. The silence in the dining room became absolute. The kind of heavy, suffocating silence that precedes a massive explosion. The developers were not just looking at a canceled real estate deal. They were looking at federal wire fraud. They were looking at international money laundering. They were sitting in a room with a man who had actively used their corporate funds to commit a felony. You brought us into a trap, the lead counsel said, slowly closing the black binder. He turned to look at Desmond, his eyes blazing with a mix of fury and intense legal self-preservation. You represented yourself as the legal proxy of this estate. You provided us with fraudulent banking information. You have exposed our firm to federal liability. Desmond held his hands up, taking a desperate step toward the developers. Please, you have to understand. My daughter is manipulating the data. We can still execute the sale. I will lower the price. I will give you the plaza for 50% below market value right now. Just sign the papers. Silas let out a dark, booming laugh. You have nothing to sell, Desmond. You do not own the plaza. You do not even own the house you are standing in. You are a thief caught with his hands in the vault, begging the police for a discount. The lead counsel did not wait to hear another word. He snatched his briefcase off the mahogany table. He looked at his senior partners and gave a sharp, definitive nod. Pack it up, the counsel ordered his team. We are leaving. Now. Desmond threw himself in front of the double doors blocking their exit. You cannot leave. We have an agreement. I need this deal to close today. You wired the deposit. We are bound by the letter of intent. Move out of my way, Desmond, the senior partner demanded, his voice turning lethal. There is no agreement. Your letter of intent was signed under fraudulent pretenses. Our legal team will be contacting the federal authorities the moment we are back in Miami. We will be seeking full restitution for our stolen deposit, and we will be turning over every single email you sent us to the authorities. Trey lunged forward, grabbing his father's arm. Dad, what is he talking about? What did you do with the deposit money? Desmond shoved his son away, his eyes wild with terror. Shut up, Trey. Just shut up. Please, gentlemen, I can fix this. I can make you whole. Give me 48 hours. The lead counsel signaled his team. They physically pushed past Desmond, shoving his shoulders aside to open the heavy mahogany doors. Desmond stumbled backward, hitting the wall as the four men marched out of the dining room and straight down the hallway. We listened to their rapid footsteps echo across the marble foyer. We heard the massive front doors open and slam shut. We heard the engines of their private transport vehicles roar to life and speed down the driveway. The multi-million-dollar payout was completely destroyed. The massive fraudulent exit strategy Desmond had banked his entire freedom on had just evaporated into the freezing winter air. The wolves had realized they were stepping into a bear trap, and they had fled to save their own lives. Desmond slowly slid down the wall, his knees giving out. He collapsed onto the hardwood floor, staring blankly at the space where his buyers had been standing just seconds ago. He looked like a man who had just watched his own execution. Valerie let out a piercing, hysterical scream from the hallway. Chloe clamped her hands over her mouth, backing away from the dining table as if the wood itself had caught fire. Trey stood frozen, his sunburned face turning a sickly shade of gray as he finally comprehended the magnitude of the disaster. I sat perfectly still at the head of the table. I smoothed the lapels of my charcoal suit. I looked at the black binder resting in the center of the table, a monument to my relentless, flawless audit. Silas remained seated to my right, projecting the absolute unyielding power of a patriarch who had just reclaimed his throne. The ambush was complete. The financial lifeblood was frozen, the real estate assets were secured, and the ultimate escape route had been brutally severed. My father and my brother had walked into the room expecting to steal a kingdom. Instead, they had walked into their own slaughterhouse, and they had absolutely nowhere left to run. The silence following the slamming of the front doors did not last long. The illusion of family loyalty shattered the very second the money disappeared. Chloe was the first to snap. She spun around to face Trey, her sunburned features twisted into a mask of absolute revulsion. She shoved him hard in the chest, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light of the chandelier. "You lied to me," Chloe screamed, her voice shrill and echoing off the imported marble. "You told me you were a senior partner. You told me you bought the Buckhead penthouse in cash with your own bonuses. The developers just said this was all a fraud. Where is our money, Trey? Where is the money?" Trey stumbled backward, raising his hands in a pathetic attempt to pacify his furious wife. "Chloe, baby, calm down. Dad is going to fix this. It is just a temporary liquidity issue." "Temporary liquidity issue," I interjected, keeping my tone deadly flat. "Your bank account has exactly $42.15 in it, Trey. You have never earned a dime of your own wealth. Your entire marriage is funded by stolen checks that your father forged to drain my grandfather." Chloe looked at me, then back at Trey, the horror dawning in her eyes as she realized her entire high society lifestyle was a criminal fabrication. She realized her name was likely attached to those fraudulent accounts. She let out a guttural scream, slapped Trey across the face, and stormed out of the dining room, dragging her heavy canvas laundry bag behind her. Trey chased after her, begging and pleading, but she was already demanding her father and his lawyer on her cell phone. The golden child was entirely broken. Valerie fell to her knees beside Silas in his chair. She grabbed his arm, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "Silas, please," she sobbed, abandoning all her aristocratic pretense. "You cannot do this to us. We are your family. Desmond made a mistake, but we can fix it. Do not let Maya ruin our lives. You know how she gets. She is just trying to tear this family apart." Silas looked down at my mother with an expression of absolute Arctic indifference. He gently but firmly detached her hands from his tailored suit. "You abandoned me in a freezing house to rot, while you drank cocktails on a beach funded by my stolen legacy." Silas stated, his baritone voice steady and resolute. "You chose to be a parasite, Valerie, and parasites get exterminated." Desmond pushed himself off the hardwood floor. His face was a dark, dangerous shade of purple. The charming real estate tycoon was gone, replaced by a cornered, desperate predator. He charged toward the head of the mahogany table, stopping just inches from where I sat. He slammed his fists on the polished wood, leaning over me in a blatant attempt at physical intimidation. "You think you have won?" Maya, Desmond snarled, spit flying from his lips. "You think you can just walk in here with some printed spreadsheets and steal my birthright? I will hire the most vicious litigators in this state. I will tie you up in civil court for the next 20 years. I will drag your name through the mud until you cannot even find work as a bookkeeper. You are nothing but a bitter, jealous mistake." I did not flinch. I did not lean back. I held his furious gaze with the unshakable calm of a woman who held every single key to his cage. "You cannot hire any litigators," Dad, I replied evenly. "Litigators require retainers. You do not have any money." I froze the corporate slush funds. I froze the offshore Cayman accounts. I transferred the entire 8-figure investment portfolio into a newly formed ironclad trust that you have absolutely no access to. Desmond and his eyes widened in sheer panic as the reality of his total financial paralysis set in. "You have no legal right to touch those accounts. I am the power of attorney." "You were the power of attorney," I corrected him. "That authority was fully revoked yesterday morning. I am now the sole trustee and the absolute executor of this entire commercial empire. You have zero liquidity. You have zero authority. You are entirely bankrupt." I reached into the final manila envelope resting on the center of the table. I pulled out 2 thick stacks of legal paper. I slid the first stack directly in front of Desmond. Then I slid the second stack to the edge of the table, gesturing for Trey, who had just walked back into the room looking utterly defeated, to approach. "What is this?" Desmond whispered, staring at the bold legal heading on the top page. "That is your 30-day eviction notice," I stated. Trey picked up his stack, his hands trembling violently. Eviction. For the penthouse. You cannot evict me from my own home. I decorated that place. My life is there. You do not own that penthouse, Trey, I explained, shifting my gaze to my brother. Desmond bought that property using stolen retirement funds, routed through a shell company called Azure Holdings. My legal team pierced the corporate veil of that shell company this morning. The title to your luxury penthouse has been forcibly repatriated into my trust. You are a tenant and your lease has just been permanently terminated. I turned back to Desmond, who was staring at his own eviction notice as if it were written in a foreign language. And you do not own this estate. Dad, I continued, gesturing to the grand freezing dining room around us. Grandpa Silas transferred the physical deed of this property into my trust at 8 o'clock this morning. You have exactly 30 days to pack your designer suits and vacate my premises. To ensure compliance, the trust has retained an independent auditing firm to monitor your move-out process. If you or Trey attempt to damage the property strip, the fixtures, steal the artwork, or remove any assets that legally belong to the estate, I will have the police escort you out in handcuffs. Valerie let out a long, agonizing wail. She collapsed onto the floor beside her husband, burying her face in her hands. The pristine, superficial world she had lorded over me for 35 years was completely demolished. She was losing her mansion, her status, and her unearned wealth all in the same breath. She would have to face her country club friends as an evicted, penniless fraud. Desmond stared at me, completely broken. The fight had drained out of him, replaced by a hollow, vacant desperation. He dropped to his knees next to his crying wife. "Maya, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "Where are we supposed to go? How are we supposed to live? I can work for you. I can help manage the smaller properties. Do not throw me out on the street." I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no remorse, no lingering familial guilt. They had taught me that love was conditional and survival was a solo mission. I was simply returning the lesson. "You can live exactly how you expected me to live," I replied. "You can work for it." I placed my hand on the black leather presentation folder containing the criminal dossier. "Listen to me very carefully, because I will only say this once. Inside this binder is the complete forensic anatomy of your federal wire fraud, your grand larceny, and your elder financial exploitation. It contains the forged checks, the offshore routing numbers, and the medical affidavits. It is perfectly formatted and ready for the district attorney." Desmond and Trey stared at the black binder, fully recognizing it as the weapon that would put them both in federal prison. "You are going to take your eviction notices, and you are going to pack your bags in absolute silence." "Silence," I commanded. "If you ever attempt to contact me or Grandpa Silas again, if you ever try to sue the estate, or if you ever breathe a single word of slander about us to your friends, I will personally hand-deliver this binder to the White-Collar Crime Division. I will ensure you spend the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary." I stood up from the head of the table. I buttoned the jacket of my tailored charcoal suit. I looked at the three people who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small, invisible, and inadequate. They were now sitting on the floor of my dining room, completely stripped of their power, their money, and their pride. Grandpa Silas stood up beside me. He adjusted his crisp silver tie and looked down at his son. "You had an empire," Desmond Silas said quietly, "and you traded it for a cheap vacation. Enjoy packing." Silas offered me his arm. I took it. We did not look back. We walked together out of the formal dining room, our footsteps echoing with crisp, rhythmic authority across the imported marble floor of the grand foyer. I did not care about the luggage scattered near the stairs or the sound of Valerie crying in the distance. I opened the heavy mahogany front doors, letting the crisp, freezing winter air rush into the house. It was clean, biting, and utterly refreshing. We walked out onto the front steps, and I pulled the heavy doors shut behind us, locking the traitors inside the ruins of their own greed. The heavy latch clicked into place with a definitive, satisfying sound. "Well, Maya," Silas said, looking at me with a brilliant, unburdened smile. "You handled that flawlessly. I believe we have a celebratory Christmas dinner to attend." "We absolutely do, Grandpa," I replied, feeling a profound, radiant warmth expanding in my chest. "And I know a phenomenal steakhouse right in the heart of downtown that takes reservations for two.